Chapter 295. After everything had been arranged, Fan Xian went to the bedroom. Lu Shi was lying on the edge of the bed, and it looked as if she had fallen asleep. He quietly woke her up, and they whispered to each other for a while. Lu Shi's tear-stained face gradually revealed a look of determination. She nodded and accepted this arrangement. She didn't know what Fan Xian had promised her, or how he had convinced her. It was getting late, and the insects in the garden had long since stopped chirping. Ruoro was accompanying Lu Shi. Fan Xian walked over to the side of his sleepy little brother and looked at his face, which was still gritting his teeth in hatred. He looked at the pockmarks that were about to burst out, and he couldn't help but smile and shake his head. He took the ink from the desk and took out the document that Shi Chanli had prepared. He pressed Sija's fingers onto the document. Seeing the bright red fingerprints on the snow-white document, Fan Xian nodded with satisfaction. From now on, the 70% of the shares that Sija owned in the Baoyu house were now officially transferred to someone else's hands. He was no longer associated with the brothel, which was filled with blood and bones. Warner knew that he was in a bad mood, and she made a face at him, but she didn't get any response. Deep in her heart, she couldn't help but feel a little useless. She smiled. Fan Xian also smiled and said, "This has nothing to do with you. Children need to go out and try their luck." He suddenly asked, "Has Miss Shin been brought back?" "She is in the West Pavilion," Warner explained. "Mr. Yin has already gone there." "Good," Fan Xian calmly agreed, and then he sat down next to Sija's bed. He thought for a moment, and then stood up again. He called for the kitchen staff to make some food, and then he sat down in the side room and picked up a bowl of hot porridge. He blew on it and slowly drank it. He wanted to give Yin and Miss Shun some time to reminisce. More importantly, he wanted to give Lu Shi some time to be alone with her son. He didn't know how much time had passed, but Deng Ziyu was led by a servant. He nodded at Fan Xian. Fan Xian understood. He didn't want anyone else to help him, so he walked into the bedroom and personally carried Fan Sija to the back of the courtyard through the corner gate. He then climbed into the carriage. Fan Sija was still in a daze. Lady Lu bit her lip and stroked his cheek affectionately, but he did not wake up. Ro also stroked his thick ears with reluctance. Even Wanner's eyes flashed with a hint of sadness at the separation. Only Count Sinan, Fan Jian, continued to sleep peacefully, as if he did not care about his youngest son at all. He was about to leave for a foreign country, and did not know when he would return. "You guys go first," Fan Xian said to the icy-faced Yin Bingyun. "I'll have to trouble your father with this matter. Be careful when you leave the city." After nightfall, the gates of Jingdo were closed. Only the people of the Overwatch Council had the power to silently send a person out of the city. Yin Bingyun slowly raised his head, glanced at him, and asked, "You're not coming?" Fan Xian lowered his head and said, "We'll meet at Songlin Bao. I still have some things to do." From the corner of his eyes, he could clearly see that his brother had tears in the corners of his eyes. He had clearly woken up, but he did not know why he had pretended to be unconscious in front of Lady Lu. Fan Sija's lips twitched. He must have hated Fan Xian and his father. In the darkness, besides the Chinian unit, there were also swordsmen from the 6th Bureau on standby. Based on the strength of this group, unless the second prince mobilized the Yi family's forces in the capital, there was no way they could face them head-on. Fan Xian stood below the carriage with his head lowered for a moment, then waved his hand. The carriage slowly began to move, heading out of the capital. Behind them, the three women who stood by the back door of Fan Manor couldn't help but look sorrowful. Lady Lu's sorrow was even greater. The unmarked carriages traveled through the quiet, dark streets of the capital. Yin Bingyun had used some unknown method to leave the city without a hitch. They stepped onto the official road outside the city and traveled northwest for half an hour. Using the moonlight, they saw that there was a small mountain in front of them, and they arrived at Songlin Bao. The carriages stopped there, waiting for Fan Xian. Fan Sija, who was in the carriage, suddenly opened his eyes at this moment. His eyes were still filled with ruthlessness. "Aren't you afraid that I'll run away during this exile journey?" There were only him and Yin Bingyun in the carriage. Yin Bingyun coldly said, "You're a smart man. Of course you know what to do. Fan Xian has used so many methods for your sake. Of course, it's not just to ensure your safety. Fan Xija lowered his voice and cursed. It's to protect his own reputation. Yin Bingyun mockingly replied. If it was just to protect his own reputation, he could have sent you directly to the capital government. Who could say anything about it? Fan Xija knew this was the case, but he refused to admit it. In a shrill voice, he said, "That's because father would not allow such a thing to happen." The minister? Yin Bingyun's cold eyes had an additional trace of mockery. The minister's thoughts are not something that young people like you and I can think about. Fan Xija weakly said, "Brother Yin, where does my brother want me to go?" "Northern Qi," Yin Bingyun replied. "Ah." Fan Xija's face showed a look of despair. He let out a long sigh, and then fell to the ground in a manner that did not match his age. He lay down, but when he touched the wound on his back, he couldn't help but let out a scream. Yin Bingyun looked at him, amused. Fan Xian's medicine. Although effective, it is very overbearing. You should continue to endure it. Back when he was in Shangjing, Northern Qi, he had been tormented by Fan Xian in the same way. "I know what I'm doing. It looks terrible, but I haven't broken any bones. Why are you acting pitiful?" Fan Xian spoke coldly, and with a cold face, he walked into the carriage. Fan Xija looked at the expression on Yin Bingyun's face and thought of the punishment he had received earlier. "What are you doing?" Yin Bingyun frowned and looked at him. "Time is of the essence." Fan Xian put down the person he was carrying on his back and threw her next to Fan Xija. Suddenly, the carriage was filled with a faint fragrance. Fan Xija was shocked. Looking at the woman's soft face, he was shocked. He shouted at Fan Xian, "What did you do to her?" The woman that Fan Xian had captured was the Baiyue brothel's most popular prostitute, Yin Er. Fan Xian looked at Fan Xija and laughed mockingly. "You pity her that much? It looks like you have inherited your father's good genes. When you opened the brothel, why didn't you show some mercy?" Fan Xija and Yin Bingyun did not understand the word genes, but they were curious as to why Fan Xian had captured this woman. Of course, with Fan Xian's skills and the use of drugs, and the fact that the Baiyue brothel was in a state of panic, it would have been easy for him to kidnap a prostitute. "Is she your first woman?" Fan Xian looked into his brother's eyes and softly asked. Fan Xija thought for a while and nodded. His eyes looked pitiful, and he begged his brother to let the woman go. Fan Xian shook his head and sighed. "You are indeed stronger than me. 14 years old, and you already had your bud." He then laughed out loud and said seriously, "I know your attitude toward this woman is different from others. I also found out that she still has some affection for you, although you are only old enough to be her younger brother." Fan Xian couldn't help but smile. The Baiyue brothel will not be peaceful in the future. If Yin were to remain there, I don't think you would feel at ease. I will not bring her back to the manor. Even if my father allowed it, Annie Lu would have killed her. Fan Xian calmly said, "After thinking about it, your journey up north, although it was meant to be a trial, it was far too lonely. It would not be good for your temperament. So, I brought her with me to accompany you." Fan Xija and Yin Bingyun's eyes opened wide. They were full of disbelief. He was being exiled from the capital, and he was bringing a popular prostitute with him? Was this an exile, or was this a vacation? "Brother, what are you trying to do?" Fan Xija did not believe that, after all the trouble he had caused, he would still be able to enjoy the privileges that even the second young master of the Fan Manor could not enjoy. He spoke with a stutter, and he looked at Fan Xian's calm face in fear. He even forgot about the pain he was feeling. Yin Bingyun looked at Fan Xian and felt very confused. He shook his head and patted Fan Xija's shoulder, saying, "Your brother is a wonderful man." He got off the carriage and left the carriage for the two brothers. After a short silence, Fan Xian quietly looked at Xija and said, "Why didn't you say goodbye to your mother?" Without waiting for him to answer, he asked, "Do you know why I am so angry this time? Why did father and I decide to send you away?" Fan Xija lowered his head and thought for a moment. He then said, "Sending me away? I don't have to worry about the capital government handling the Baiyue brothel case. Even if I run away to avoid punishment, I don't have to worry about that. That way, my family can go and fight with the second son. Correct. Fan Xian was pleased to find that his brother, under his influence, had begun to refer to the princes as the second son and the third son. Secondly, it is my punishment. Fan Xija suddenly raised his head and endured the pain in his buttocks. He cried and said, "But I don't want to go. Brother, the people of Northern Qi Kingdom are very fierce. What do I do there?" "Do what?" Fan Xian very seriously replied. "Do what you're best at, of course. Do business." Fan Xija raised his head stupidly. He did not look like the owner of the Baiwa brothel at all. He asked, "Do business?" "Yes." Fan Xian said, "Father asked me to make some arrangements. I thought about it, and I decided to leave you 1,000 liang of silver. When you arrive in Shangjing, I will send someone to pick you up, but I will not give you any extra help. If you can, within 5 months, turn this 1,000 liang of silver into 10,000, then I will truly acknowledge your ability. And then 10 times?" Before his brother could finish, Fan Xija could not help but shout, "I am not a god." "That is your problem," Fan Xian said. 1,000 liang of silver is too little. Fan Xija was both embarrassed and angry. This business is embarrassing. What kind of bullsh *T logic is this? When we opened Damba bookstore, how much money did we spend? Bah, if you have the ability, then go and sell Story of the Stone. I promise I can turn 1,000 into 10,000. You wish. That guy with the surname Chow has already been driven crazy by me. Where else can he go? After the two brothers yelled at each other, the atmosphere became a little more relaxed. Fan Xian looked at Fan Xija's chubby face and sighed. "It is very windy out there. Father told me not to take too much care of you. You must be careful." Fan Xija silently nodded and suddenly said, "Brother, you said I am a genius at business. Do not worry." Fan Xian then said, "I hope you do not blame me for chasing you out of the capital." Fan Xija shook his head and did not say anything. Fan Xian knew he must be feeling very uncomfortable, so he frowned and said, "Actually, the 2 reasons you gave me to get you out of the capital were false." Fan Xija raised his head and looked very confused. Fan Xian quietly said, "Even if you stay in the capital, what is there to be afraid of? Don't tell me I can't even protect you? I could just hide somewhere and wait for this to die down. I don't think the second prince would dare do anything to me. Even if the capital government were to investigate the Baoyu brothel, would they dare to search the capital in front of the Fan family? As for the second reason, you said it was to punish you. That is only a small part of it." Fan Xian looked at the unconscious Baoyu brothel headliner and calmly said, "On this journey north, perhaps you will suffer a bit. But compared to the things you have done, it is really nothing. If I send you back to Danzhou, according to grandmother's way of doing things, I'm afraid you will be even more miserable." Fan Xija was a little scared and pulled back his head. He did not dare make a sound because of the injury on his back. In his heart, he was thinking, "Then why do you have to chase me north?" Fan Xian slowly lowered his eyelids and said, "I didn't think you would be so daring in doing things and so ruthless. If you remained in Jingdou, for the sake of father and me, other people would always have this or that kind of honey to lure you into the deepest valley. Thus, I feel that it's better for you to experience some wind and rain outside. Perhaps it will be more beneficial for your growth." He suddenly looked at Fan Xija coldly and said, "In business, you must do whatever it takes. But there must be a certain degree of control. If you're too sharp and cruel, it is easy to get hurt. Besides, as a person, it is always good to be kind to others. You must always try to be on the bright side." In reality, Fan Xija had never been very happy with the Baoyu brothel. After all, in his eyes, the Baoyu brothel was a symbol of his success. The dirty things that were hidden in it were not a big deal. He lay on a long carriage stool and said with a grunt, "These words are full of righteousness. Those who don't understand would think that my good brother has nothing to do with the Overwatch Council and is instead a wooden scholar of the Imperial College." His words were full of mockery, but Fan Xian only raised his eyebrows. He was the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, and his subordinates specialized in doing dark things. A mere brothel, regardless of whether it was in terms of the density of darkness and filth or in terms of the level of cruelty, was a world of difference. It was no wonder that his brother did not think much of his discipline. Fan Xian smiled and said, "Do you think that I have always stood on the wrong side, and to use these words to talk about you is absurd?" Fan Xija saw his brother smile warmly and began to panic again. He did not dare say anything, but his black eyes rolled. It was clear that this was what he meant. "Of course I am not a saint. I'm not even a good person," Fan Xian said. Fan Xian said, "But even if it was a murderous butcher, if he truly cherished his family, presumably he would have the same thoughts as me. In our line of work, even if we reek of blood, we still want our brothers to be pure and clean. Perhaps it is because we have come into contact with the most evil things in the world, so we hope you can stay away from these things." Fan Xija heard him say "we" over and over again, and he was suspicious. Fan Xian thought for a moment, and then quietly told the story of Xiao En and Zhuang Mohan. He smiled and said, "Xiao En has killed many people in his life and done many evil things, but he still wanted to raise his brother to be a good man. In reality, he succeeded. Zhuang Mohan did not disappoint him. Until the night before his death, I still admire him. Although your brother is not very talented, I want to do what Xiao En did." He seemed to be trying to convince his brother, but it also seemed like he was trying to comfort himself. "It is good to be a good person. I want to be a good person, too." This was the first time Fan Xija had heard of such a shocking secret. His mouth was wide open, and he was speechless for a long time. After a long time, he said in a trembling voice, "But when I look at Master Zhuang's historical collections, I get a headache. Brother, if you want me to be a master, it will be too difficult." Fan Xian laughed angrily. "With a brain like yours, of course you won't be able to study." Fan Xija didn't know what to say. "Then tell me this story. Do your business well. In the future, you will strive to be a merchant whose name will go down in history." Fan Xian smiled encouragingly. "Merchants don't have to be as treacherous as people think. In this world, there are some merchants who walk the bright path and still succeed." Fan Xija said foolishly, "Merchants focus on profit. You just need to make money. How can you go down in history? The bright path? Even if you succeed, you will still be a piece of fat meat in the mouths of the government. With me and my father, you could do business properly. Who would dare to do anything to you?" Fan Xian looked at him with calm and gentle eyes. "And have you forgotten about the Yi family? You told me on the Tsang Mountains that the reason you were interested in business since you were young was because when you were little, your father often told you about the Yi family's power and influence. If the mistress of the Yi family hadn't died, not to mention the government, even the big countries in the world wouldn't have dared to do anything to the Yi family." Fan Xija's eyes lit up, but they immediately dimmed. "The brothel business is very profitable. It's more profitable than anything else." He still felt that in business, what was the point of saving face? Making money was the most important thing. Fan Xian smiled. "I asked Big Yi of Qingyu Hall. He said that in the past, the Yi family did all kinds of business, except for these unorthodox ones. First of all, the mistress of the Yi family's gender determined it. She must have hated this business. Second of all, Big Ye's explanation is that unorthodox. Since there's the word unorthodox, then even if you can make a lot of money, in the end, it's not the right way. It's like the green water beside a big river. Although it's deep and endless, it can't be vast and mighty. If you really want to be the best in business, just playing around in these small rivers won't do." For some reason, the more Fan Xian spoke, the more excited he became. Perhaps it had touched the softest part of his heart. He said in a clear voice, "It's not easy to live. Whatever you do, you have to do it to the extreme. Then you can't be satisfied with being an unscrupulous merchant, and you can't be satisfied with being an official merchant or even a royal merchant. The way of business still exists. You have to be a merchant of the world. Not only will you be rich enough to rival a country, but you will also be respected by the people, and your name will be remembered for generations to come." Fan Xian spoke slowly, but Fan Xija felt a headache coming on. He looked at his brother helplessly and said, "The Yi family, back in the day, even sold firearms. They helped the Qing kingdom destroy Northern Wei. The people in the north didn't like them very much. If we're talking about business, Baiwa brothel, I only used a few dirty tricks. Master Yuan only killed a few prostitutes, but the mistress of the Yi family has killed many innocent souls. Big brother, what you're saying? Fan Xian was a loss for words. He waved his hand disinterestedly, stopping Fan Xija from continuing to compare. He said, in any case, bullying the weak is not very interesting. Fan Xija suddenly looked worried and said, Big brother, I really don't want to leave the capital. He then said, Father and mother are in the capital, and I want you to be filial to them on my behalf. He knew that only if he left the capital would the Baiwa brothel incident truly die down. The weapon the second prince used to draw the Fan family to his side would disappear without a trace. Although Fan Xian would never admit this, seeing his father's decision, he knew that he had brought trouble to his family. And after hearing what Fan Xian had said, the 14-year-old boy felt a surge of desire. If he could reach the level of the mistress of the Yi family in this lifetime, how great would that be? Fan Xian nodded and agreed. He leaned over to his brother and whispered something into his ear. Finally, he told him about the people he could trust in Shanjing. Fan Xija suddenly heard his brother's true intentions, and for a moment, he was stunned. The palace treasury, smuggling to the north, the Chui family, such a large amount of money. Did he have the ability to do so? Chapter 296. Do you still remember last year when I beat up Guo Baokuan with an underground fist? The capital government wanted to hold me accountable. I remember. Do you still remember this year's spring examination case, and the Ministry of Justice wanted to interrogate me? I remember. Fan Xija glanced at him with some confusion. Was his brother saying this to remind him of the dignity of Qing law? But the problem was that these two cases ended without a conclusion. It only proved that in a place like the kingdom of Qing, power was still above the law. It was clearly a negative example. Fan Xian smiled and patted his butt. Both times, you beat the officials with sticks in your hands. Although it was mainly because of your arrogant and domineering personality, you always have a sense of friendship toward me, a brother you've known for less than 2 years. I believe I'm not wrong about this. Fan Xija's buttocks were full of scars. He bit his lower lip in pain and said, Then why did you hit me so hard earlier? Fan Xian smiled. First of all, I'm really angry. I won't hide it from you. Second, if I don't beat you up badly, how can I make the people of Jingdo believe that the Fan family is still strict and strict? It's half acting and half real. Fan Xija suddenly said in a daze, Brother, such an important matter in the north. Are you really leaving it to me? Fan Xian replied, Prove yourself first. Fan Xija gritted his teeth and revealed a fanatical expression. He said with hatred, Fine, I can definitely do it. Fan Xian nodded and looked at the sleeping prostitute of the Baiwa brothel by his brother's side. He raised his eyebrows and said, Yesterday, when we raided the building, I discovered that this woman has some affection for you. I am your brother, so of course, I know that your heart is very hard and ruthless. But when it is time to be soft, you can be soft. Perhaps you will find that life will be much more interesting. After all, Fan Xija was still young, and it was his first time experiencing the affairs between a man and a woman. His face flushed with embarrassment as he responded. The two brothers continued to talk in the carriage. At this moment, the carriage came to a halt. The two of them knew that it was time to part ways. Fan Xian shook his head and said, This trip will be difficult and dangerous. Although you must still feel resentment toward me, I think in the future you will understand my good intentions. As for father, don't feel any resentment. You have to know that in this world, other than parents and brothers, it is difficult for anyone to truly treat you well. You were chased out of Jingdo at such a young age. Naturally, Aunt Lu is sad. I'm afraid father won't have it easy either. Fan Xija nodded sadly. Watching Fan Xian's silhouette disembark from the carriage, he thought of the days to come. He couldn't help but feel empty in his heart. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he felt unspeakably uncomfortable. Brother, bring me back soon. Fan Xian's figure stiffened as he got off the carriage. Don't worry, I'll settle everything quickly. Watching the carriage slowly disappear into the night, Fan Xian could not help but feel a little absent-minded. He was not a good person, so why did he demand that Xija be a good person? Perhaps his previous explanation was correct. The relationship between people was very delicate. Wang Jingwei did not want his son to be a traitor, and Hitler probably would have preferred his son to be a painter. Of course, these two did not have the opportunity to show Fan Xian, but he had seen the relationship between Xiao En and Zhuang Mohan, the two brothers, over the decades, and he deeply agreed with them. The legendary pair of brothers, Xiao En, had secretly done many things for Zhuang Mohan. No one knew, but he had always hidden himself in the dark. He cared about his brother's reputation and refused to acknowledge him. This was already a remarkable thing. When Zhuang Mohan was in his 70s or 80s, he was almost at the end of his rope. His personal reputation had reached the peak of his life. In order for his brother to escape, he did not hesitate to abandon his lifelong beliefs and come all the way to Qing Kingdom to frame Fan Xian. The price he paid was not as simple as it seemed. He completely abandoned what Zhuang Mohan treasured the most. Coincidentally, before these two influential figures passed away, Fan Xian was by their side. Fan Xian watched the carriage leave and sighed in his heart. He did not know whether or not Xija would bear a grudge against him. He also did not know, in the distant future, if he were to one day sink into the darkness like Xiao, would Xija be like Zhuang Mohan and risk everything to save him? The night wind blew over the hills outside the capital. Fan Xian shook his head in self-mockery. Given Xija's personality, he would at most be willing to lose tens of thousands of taels of silver for him. If the amount of silver was a little more, that greedy and cruel little guy would have to reevaluate. Yin Bingyun stood beside him and suddenly said, "You are a very hypocritical person." Fan Xian asked with great interest, "Why do you say that? You use everyone around you, but you make it seem like you're doing it for their own good." The corners of Yin Bingyun's lips curled up slightly. Fan Xian replied calmly, "You don't have a brother, so you can't understand this kind of feeling. I really am doing it for his own good. Although my methods may have been a bit excessive, and the results may not have been good, but there is no other way. My experience can only go so far. At least, in the future, I can say to myself that I have done my part as a brother for Xija's growth. That is the second point I wanted to make." Yin Bingyun nodded. "You are a very cruel person." Fan Xian was silent, knowing that Yin Bingyun would continue. Young Master Fan is still young, and the situation in the north is very complicated, and yet you were able to ruthlessly expel him from the capital and make him disappear, cutting off the possibility of others blackmailing you. It seems that even the second prince did not expect such a ruthless move, Yin Bingyun said coldly. There was no smile on Fan Xian's face. Instead, he asked, "How do you think people should live their lives?" After Ro, Xija, and Wan this was the fourth time Fan Xian had asked someone about Ostrovsky's eternal question. Yin Bingyun was slightly startled and shook his head. "My thinking is very simple. As an official of the Overwatch Council, I should be loyal to His Majesty, to the Kingdom of Qing, to make the country rich and powerful, and to unify the world." "Unify the world?" Fan Xian said sarcastically. "What is the point of that?" Yin Bingyun was startled again. As a member of the younger generation of the Kingdom of Qing, he had grown up in a time when the country's power was expanding rapidly. This kind of thinking was ingrained in his bones. He had never thought about why he wanted to unify the world, and no one had ever asked him about it. Now, that Fan Xian had suddenly asked him this question, he did not know how to explain it. The world is divided into 3 parts, and there are many small countries in the middle. War is inevitable, and the people are destitute. In that case, why not unify the world and get rid of the threat of war? After thinking for a while, he tried to sort out his thoughts. Fan Xian shook his head. "I have never believed in the power of the world. Divided for a long time, united for a long time, divided for a long time, united for a few hundred years, divided for another few hundred years. If the divided countries did not have the ambition to unify the world, then where would there be war? Unifying the world is not a way to get rid of war and bring peace. It is a fruit to tempt the people of the world to throw themselves into war. If everyone did not think this way, then wouldn't the world be at peace? Yin Bingyun glanced at him and mockingly said, "That is a very childish way of thinking. I also understand." Fan Xian sighed. "But when I'm alive, I really do not want to see such things as war. In 1 year, the number of people who died at the hands of the council is about 400. In August, the Yangtze River broke its banks. I estimate tens of thousands of people have already died. If war truly starts, in just a few months, I'm afraid hundreds of thousands of people will die. Even if the conflict can be temporarily suppressed, it cannot last. There will come a day when war breaks out." Yin Bingyun snorted disdainfully. "Even if you gather the 4 great grandmasters as fighters and forcefully suppress the ambitions of the royal family, what will happen after you die?" Fan Xian smiled and said, "After I die? After I die, even if the flood reaches the sky." Louis XIV's most blatant declaration finally made Yin Bingyun's expression change. He shook his head and sighed. "I thought you were a benevolent person hiding in the darkness. After hearing what you said, only then do I realize that what I said just now was considered polite. Not only are you ruthless, but you're also an extremely selfish person. You misunderstood, didn't you? I told you last time, I am not a saint." Fan Xian suddenly frowned and teased him. "But now it seems there is no harm in being a saint. A saint in charge of the Overwatch Council." Yin Bingyun looked at him like he was looking at a ghost. "Then how do you plan to spend the rest of your life?" Yin Bingyun rarely asked a question like those people in Shangjing in northern Qi. "I plan to spend the rest of my life well." Fan Xian said this superfluous sentence without waiting for a response. He laughed and said, "This time, Xia has gone north, and I have troubled you and your father. To send a person through the entire Qin kingdom without anyone knowing, other than monitoring the movements of the officials in each county and the Overwatch Council, which controlled the foreign spy network, going easy everywhere, or even stealing from within, it was truly impossible to do this." "You are my superior," Yin Bingyun replied directly. Fan Xian understood what he was thinking and said, "I will report this to the director." He continued, "Did you know? The last time the diplomatic mission left the capital, the first night, they set up camp in this pine forest below us." He rubbed his nose and laughed at himself. "At that time, Sea Lily was in the diplomatic mission. Today, Xia has been exiled. Although his situation is much worse than mine, I also captured a woman to accompany him. It seems that our journey will not be lonely." Yin Bingyun shook his head with a slight headache. It was difficult for him to get used to Fan Xian's shamelessness, which he only showed to his close subordinates and friends. So he asked, "Now that there is nothing to worry about, what do you plan to do?" Fan Xian laughed bitterly. "He is a prince. Do you really think we would dare to kill him?" Yin Bingyun coldly said, "I don't think there is anything you wouldn't dare to do." Fan Xian's heart jumped, and he smiled and said, "It looks like you really do understand me. But there is no rush. First, I will ruin Hongqing's reputation. Then, I will torture the second prince's men and force the Chui family into a corner. In the end," he quietly said, "I will no longer concern myself with the Baoyue brothel. You help Shi Chanli deal with it. As for what to do next, you are in charge. After all, when it comes to scheming, you are far more talented than I am." Chapter 297. The Baoyue brothel was still open for business. Although there were a few well-informed people who knew that the Fan family and the second prince had been fighting over the most popular brothel in the capital, the Fan family had only beaten the Baoyue brothel a little and did not have much of a reaction. The Overwatch Council did not make things difficult for the Baoyue brothel either, so everyone thought the matter was over. In the minds of these officials, this was a very natural outcome. After all, no matter how arrogant Fan Xian was, there was always a lot of taboo in front of a prince. Furthermore, in the eyes of the public, the second master of the Fan family was running the Baoyue brothel. Although it had damaged the reputation of the Fan family, he had earned a lot of money from it. If everyone worked together to suppress this matter, it would be a win-win situation. To the people of the capital who did not know what was going on, they only saw the Overwatch Council raiding the brothel and heard the beating of the wooden planks in Fan Manor. To them, there was something strange about the whole thing. When did the Emperor's secret service begin to manage the brothel? What had happened to the Fan family? Why had the little tyrants of the streets of the capital suddenly disappeared without a trace? But regardless of whether they knew about this matter or not, they all thought that this matter would be the same as the usual conflicts between influential officials in the capital. In the end, because of the invisible but dense network of relationships in the air, it would disappear without a trace. As the saying goes, good for you, good for me, and good for everyone. However, the managers, girls, and shopkeepers of the Bayou brothel were not as relaxed as outsiders thought. This was because ever since the Overwatch Council raided the brothel, the big boss had not returned to the Bayou brothel. It was as if he had disappeared. Although there were rumors that the young big boss was under house arrest, no one could rest easy without confirmation. Plus, the second boss had a special status, so he could not watch over the brothel every day. For a while, the Bayou brothel maintained a calm appearance, but there was an undercurrent that was slowly flowing under the surface. On the other side of the undercurrent, the people of the Second Prince were also wondering why the Fan family had sent the people involved in the murder of the brothel to the capital government. Ever since Mei Zhili had changed positions, this important yamen had always been under the control of the Second Prince. The other party must have known that the capital government was within the scope of the Second Prince's power. If the Fan family was prepared to shed all pretense of cordiality and send the second young master to the authorities for investigation, then why was it that there was only news of the second young master being grounded? There was no sign of the Overwatch Council or the Fan family making a move. The Second Prince was having a headache over this matter. He had no idea that the Fan family would so decisively expel Fan Seizure from the capital and quietly send him to a foreign country. The Overwatch Council's work was flawless, but there was still a faint worry that prompted the Second Prince to begin making preparations. But now that things had come to a head, they realized that they had nothing to do with the Bayou house. They were innocent. Even if they were to guard against Fan Xian's revenge, they did not know what Fan Xian could possibly do to them. So how could they guard against him? No one could grasp Fan Xian's thoughts. No one could guess Sir Yin Jr.'s ability to execute. On this day, the wind was gentle and the clouds were light. The yellow leaves were falling, and it was a perfect day for a trip outside the capital. There were still 6 days until the day of the royal family's chrysanthemum viewing. The officials and commoners of the capital had all brought their families to the outskirts of the capital. Since it was still daytime, the Bayou house was particularly quiet. Because the future was uncertain and the owner was missing, the usually energetic receptionists were leaning against a pillar. The girls by the lake were forcing themselves to smile, and they were accompanying the old perverts who liked to indulge in daylight. Some unknown insects were hopping around the stone steps of the side corridor, crying out with all their might. They struggled to no avail, waiting for their end to come. The waiters in the building all looked a little uneasy. They picked up the rag and wiped the table. In the past, Fan Seizure had given strict orders that the table had to be tested with a white silk. They had to confirm that there was not a speck of dust on it before it passed. How could it be as easy as it was now? Suddenly, someone walked in. This person's eyebrows were very thick, and they looked as if they had been painted on. Although this appearance was not out of the ordinary, it was very easy to remember. So, one of the receptionists who had received him one night immediately recognized him. He froze next to the door of the Bayou house. His body sprung up, but he did not dare go forward to greet him. It was one of the waiters who looked at the receptionist strangely. He neatly put the gray rag in his hand on the table and sang, "A guest has arrived." The end of his voice was crisp and very pleasant to listen to. The person who came was slightly startled, and a wry smile appeared on his face. It seemed that there was a great deal of difficulty in his heart. He stood in the incomparably wide hall of the Bayou house for a while. Finally, he could not help but shake his head and say, "Tell Xiqing to come see me." This time, it was the waiter's turn to be shocked. He thought to himself that this guest was very arrogant. He wanted Xiqing to come see him personally, and he even called her by her name. There were many nobles in the capital, but of those who came to the Baoyu house, who did not treat Si Ching-er with respect. The receptionist, who knew this person, finally came to his senses. He wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead and ran in front of the person. He respectfully said, "Sir, I will go and inform you immediately." He then asked the waiters to lead the person to the second floor of the third floor. It was the quietest room in the Baoyu house, and he ordered the waiters to take good care of him. When the person went upstairs, the waiters and waiters on the first floor surrounded him. They did not stop talking, and they did not know which deity had come. The Baoyu house was currently in a state of turmoil, but the people's hearts were already wavering. The slightest movement would cause everyone to feel uneasy. Finally, someone remembered that this person with thick eyebrows, who looked like an ordinary scholar, was actually the companion of young Master Chun, who came to visit the prostitute that day. Who was Mr. Chun? It was the brother of the owner of the Baoyu house. It was Mr. Fan, the most popular person in the government. The person who had come was Mr. Fan's confidant, and it was likely that he was a high-ranking official in the Overwatch Council. Everyone in the brothel was stunned. They all knew what had happened that day. The brothel had offended Mr. Fan, and even the owner had suffered. Today, someone else had come. Was it possible that the Overwatch Council was going to raid the brothel again? Could the Baoyu house continue to operate? At this time, someone sighed and said, "I think the brothel will have to pay a large sum of money to settle this. It is a shame. Although the owner is a bit cruel, he is very good at business. For no reason at all, he has to feed the mouths of these officials. No matter how good the business is, it will be ruined." Bah! Someone could not bear to see him pretend to be the great priest of the Qing temple. He laughed and said, "You idiot! The owner of the Baoyu house is Mr. Fan's brother. If the Overwatch Council wanted to collect money, it would not come to us. Do you think the two of them are going to collect money from each other? There's even an old minister overseeing them." The man's face was cut, and he mumbled, "Then what is this person doing here with Commissioner Fan?" It was Shi Chanli. Fan Xian was having a good time, and Shi Chanli was a scholar. He had been chased to a brothel by his teacher, so it was only natural that he was in a bad mood. Si Qing'er's eyes flashed, and she respectfully offered him tea. She knew that although the man in front of her was not an official, he was a trusted aide of Commissioner Fan. The owner had been missing for the past few days, and now that he had suddenly appeared, she had no idea what he was here for. She paused and then gently asked, "Mr. Shi, what brings you here today?" Shi Chanli hesitated for a moment. Si Qing'er was someone that the third prince had picked out. She didn't have much of a relationship with the Fan family, so when she saw him hesitate, she misunderstood his intentions. She covered her lips and smiled. "We are all family now. Does Mr. Shi still want to raid our building?" When she said the word raid, her tongue curled. It was a strange sound. Shi Chanli's eyebrows furrowed, and he did not like this woman's flippancy. His face darkened, and he pulled out a document. In a low voice, he said, "Today, I am not here to raid the brothel. I am here to take over." "Take over?" Si Qing'er froze. She picked up the thin document from the table and quickly scanned it. Her face changed, and when she saw the red fingerprints at the bottom, she bit her lip. After a moment of silence, she finally digested the shock in her heart. She opened her eyes wide and asked, "The owner has given you all of the brothel's shares?" Her voice was filled with shock and disbelief. 70% of the Baoyu brothel shares were worth a lot of money. How could it be so easily transferred? Si Qing'er knew that this matter was not as simple as it seemed. She frowned and said, "Mr. Shi, this is too big a deal. I cannot accept it." Shi Chanli gave a wry smile and said, "I do not need you to accept it. From today onwards, I'm the owner of the Baoyu brothel. I'm only here to inform you." Si Qing'er gritted her teeth and said, "Mr. Shi, if I may ask, where is the owner? This is such a big deal, and I have to talk to him face to face." Shi Chanli was good at writing, and the document he had drafted a few nights ago was clean and simple. He did not expect that in the end, he would be forced by Fan Xian to become the owner of the brothel. He was already uncomfortable with the situation, and he felt as if he had been caught in a trap of his own making. Hearing the question being asked, he coldly said, "Is this transfer document fake? Don't waste my time. The people who will be checking the accounts will be here soon. Don't even think about it." Si Ching-er sensed that the Fan family was preparing to leave the Baoyu brothel and use the scholar in front of her as a cover. But her rank was not high enough, and she did not know much about what was going on. Master Yuan had suddenly disappeared, and so she said, "Since the Baoyu brothel is going to be owned by Shi Chanli, I am just trying to make a living. How could I dare to argue with you?" Her heart had calmed down, and she smiled and said, "But this brothel still has 30% of its shares in the hands of that young man. I am sure you know this, Mr. Shi." No matter what was said, as long as the third prince's shares were in the Baoyu brothel, the Fan family would not be able to get rid of the Baoyu brothel. She did not know that Fan Xian had no intention of getting rid of the Baoyu brothel in the first place. Shi Chanli looked at her and suddenly laughed. His thick eyebrows twitched, and he said, "Today, I am closing the brothel because I would like to trouble you, Miss Ching-er. Please tell the second owner that I will be taking the 30% shares." "I will be taking them? How arrogant of you," Si Ching-er said angrily. She thought it was easy for the Fan family to give and take, but she did not expect them to take the third prince's shares. How could it be so easy? Shi Chanli had finally gotten into the role of the brothel owner, and he calmly said, "If you want to take the 30% shares, I have many ways of doing so. Bringing it up now is to give face to the second owner. Miss Ching-er, you must understand this." Si Ching-er coldly said, "Oh, it looks like I have to thank you, Mr. Shi, but I do not know. How much money are you willing to pay?" Shi Chanli extended a finger. 100,000? Si Ching-er asked, confused. She thought this was a fair price. Even if the Baoyu brothel continued to operate well, 100,000 for 20% of the shares was a good price to pay. Shi Chanli shook his head. "Only 10,000? Si Ching-er was shocked. "I only have 1,000 liang of silver," Shi Chanli said sincerely. "Scholars are always poor. You are too much." Si Ching-er angrily shouted, "Do not think that the Fan family can hide the truth. Do not forget who these 30% shares belong to." Shi Chanli raised an eyebrow and calmly said, "Miss, do not misunderstand. These 70% shares belong to me, Shi Chanli. It has nothing to do with the Fan family or the Kai family. As for who the 30% shares belong to, I do not care." Si Ching-er coldly said, "What if I do not give up the 30% shares? First of all, the Baoyu brothel may be found with a copy of some of their letters, such as colluding with a foreign country. As for what the charges are, I am not sure." Shi Chanli smiled and said, "Second, the Baoyu brothel will soon appear in the capital. Since I own 70% of the shares, I can chase away all of the workers, customers, and girls. Then, the Baoyu brothel will hire them again. Miss Ching-er, think about it. The Baoyu brothel, which has not yet existed, can take down the Baoyu brothel in a short period of time." Si Ching-er looked determined, and she refused to back down. She said, "I do not believe the first point. Would the Fan family, no, Mr. Shi, be willing to see the Baoyu brothel collapse? Would they use 70% of the shares to take us down with them?" She looked proud and said, "The second point is even more impossible. When the owner chose the location, he was very particular about it. Plus, these girls have signed a death contract with us. How could they just leave?" Shi Chanli shook his head and sighed. "Miss Ching-er, it looks like you still do not understand the situation. You have to understand that I am the owner of the Baoyu brothel. What death contract or living contract?" Si Ching-er's face changed. Shi Chanli stood up and pushed open the window. He smiled and said, "As for the location of the Baoyu brothel, I will not hide it from you. It is to the side of the Baoyu brothel, and it is also near Thin Lake. The reason why I came back after a few days was because 2 days ago, I was busy collecting the title deed for the land." Si Ching-er was speechless. Shi Chanli was now completely immersed in his role as a ruthless businessman. He waved his hand to catch the wind from Thin Lake and continued to say, "As for taking me down with you, if you do not want to back out, then I will take you down with me. 70% of the Baoyu brothel shares may be worth a lot of money, but I do not care for it. After he said this, he laughed at himself. When did he begin to wash away his status as a scholar? Instead, he began to indulge in a life of bullying others. He was indeed threatening Si Qing'er, but this kind of threat was easy to make. It seemed simple, but it was difficult for her, or rather, the third prince, to respond. The land next to the Bayou brothel had indeed been purchased by the Overwatch Council, but no one knew what methods had been used. Sure, Chomley knew that every step of taking over the brothel had been done in a very stable manner. There was no need to worry about any mistakes. Mr. Yin Bingyun was very powerful. If the third prince did not want to give up the 30% of the shares, Mr. Yin Bingyun had a way to make the Bayou brothel close down within 10 days. Lady, you do not know the root of this matter. Do not think too much about it. Sure, Chomley did not need her to send a message to the third prince. The news that Fan Xian wanted to take over the Bayou brothel had already been passed through the Fan Manor and into the ears of Igue Pin, who was in the palace. Now, the third prince was forced to copy books by Igue Pin every day. Even if he felt bad that his money had been stolen by his cousin, he could not find a way to stop this. He looked at Si Qing'er's confused face, and the gentle nature of a scholar came into play. He smiled and said, "I am a very easy person to talk to. In the future, if you continue to work in the brothel and do your best, I will not mistreat you." Who knew that Si Qing'er was such a stubborn person? She always wanted to be responsible for the second owner. Although the second owner was only a young child, she thought of the child's identity and thought the whole thing was ridiculous. In the capital, it was common for people to steal property, but how could someone dare to steal property from a prince? If the second owner sends a message, I will agree. She gritted her teeth and said, "But the money in the account, you and I have to make sure to settle it properly. It cannot be messed up." Sure, Chomley nodded. The group of people who had been waiting outside the brothel finally entered. Seeing the group of people, Si Qing'er's eyes widened. They were all Overwatch Council secret agents in casual clothing. They were still secret agents. With such a group of people coming to take over the brothel, who would dare to stop them? When she saw the old man with the long beard in the middle of the group, who was praising the Bayou brothel, Si Qing'er could not help but take a deep breath. She was speechless, thinking that no matter how hard she tried, she would not be able to stop Fan Xian from taking the third prince's money. With the third shopkeeper of Qingyu Hall personally taking over, no matter how the accounts were calculated, she was afraid that the Bayou brothel would end up being owned by the Sher family. No, the goddamn Fan family. He would not choke, and perhaps he would not even bother to drink a bowl of water. Chapter 298. The shopkeepers of Qingyu Hall had always felt the pulse of the palace treasury and managed the businesses of the various kings. It had been many years since they had made an appearance. But Si Qing'er was a girl who had worked her way up from being a prostitute to being a top-notch madam. She was someone who was willing to learn, had a desire to improve, and had a deep understanding of the ways of business. She knew the old men of Qingyu Hall well. As long as they were in business, they all had a deep respect for the elders of the Yi family. It was the same as how the scholars of the world looked at Zhuang Mohan. So when Si Qing'er saw the three-leaf shopkeeper arrive, she immediately gave up all thoughts of playing tricks on the accounts. She was even more prepared to lose everything. She gracefully stepped forward and respectfully bowed. The three-leaf shopkeeper was probably in his 50s, and the beard on his chin was dyed white. He looked at Si Qing'er's beautiful face and nodded his head in appreciation. Sure, Chomley was frozen to the side, wondering why Master Xian had sent such an old pervert. The three-leaf sighed and said, "This lady, you must be the owner of this building. I'll look at the location of the building, the lighting, and the decorations. They are all the work of a genius. I am truly impressed. If you are willing to continue to stay in the building, I will return to Commissioner Fan. There is no need for my old bones to meddle." Si Qing'er looked embarrassed and said, "You are too kind. Everything in this building is the work of the owner. It has nothing to do with me." The third shopkeeper had a look of pity on his face. He sighed and said, "This big boss is indeed a genius in business. How could he offend Fan?" Fortunately, he was old and not stupid. He knew his words were going too far. So he quickly shut his mouth under the gaze of Sher Chonli, who looked at him like he was an old monster. He only shook his head vigorously and looked around. His expression was full of the sigh of someone who was at the peak of Dong Mountain but did not see any aces. In the eyes of the old shopkeepers of Qingyu Hall, who had been involved in the business for 20 years, although the Baoyu brothel was a shady business, the building was very bright. There was a lake behind the building, and there was a courtyard by the lake. The waiters knew when to stop and when to stop, and they knew how to be polite. The girls were not arrogant, and they did not lose their composure. It was a perfect fit for the hearts of the customers. The man who was in charge of all of this was a man who had a deep understanding of business. The old shopkeeper sighed. Sure, Chonli couldn't help but shake his head, thinking that the second young master of the Fan family was not a simple son of a noble family. It was a wonderful thing, though. The two brothers of the Fan family were different from the rest of the world. There had been no news from the palace, so Si Qing'er did not dare make a decision about the third prince's money. But now that the collection team had arrived, they had to bring out the account books for both parties to check. Although most businesses in the Qing kingdom had open accounts and secret accounts, in front of the three-leaf shopkeeper, Si Qing'er did not dare play any tricks. In the time it takes to burn a stick of incense, the Baoyu brothel's money had been clearly accounted for. The 30% of the shares, which had been converted into 1,000 liang of silver, had been temporarily separated. All that was left was to wait for the news from the third prince. After that, the entire Baoyu brothel would become Sher Chonli's business. After finishing all of this, Si Qing'er thought that the next owner of the Baoyu brothel would be the three-leaf shopkeeper of Qingyu Hall. She did not expect the old shopkeeper to leave in a carriage, which surprised Si Qing. What surprised her even more was that the new owner of the Baoyu brothel was someone she knew. Sangwon. Si Qing'er was stunned, but she quickly came to her senses. After Fan Xian had forcefully bought Sangwon away, there had been no news of her. Now she was back. Sher Chonli looked at her expression and said, "Not bad. This lady Sang will be the owner of the Baoyu brothel from now on." Si Qing'er forced herself to bow to Sangwon. Back when they were in the brothel, Sangwon was always cold and unyielding because of her reputation. It was inevitable that Si Qing'er would make things difficult for her. Now that she had become the owner of the Baoyu brothel, she knew she would not have a good time. She suppressed the anger in her chest and prepared to return to her room to pack up her belongings. Sangwon was a little uneasy. Mr. Fan had treated her well, and since he had given her the responsibility of managing the Baoyu brothel, she had to take care of it properly. But she was also a little afraid of the third prince's power. Seeing that Si Qing'er was willing to back down, she felt relieved. Sher Chonli furrowed his eyebrows and said, "Lady Qing'er, you cannot leave." Si Qing'er coldly laughed and said, "I did not sign a contract with the Baoyu brothel. Why can't I leave?" Sher Chonli felt a headache coming on and loosened the buttons on his collar. After thinking for a while, he said, "I have never run a brothel before. Lady Sang is only a singer. If you leave, I do not know if the Baoyu brothel will be able to make money." Si Qing'er now knew that he still needed her. She couldn't help but feel proud of herself. She smiled and said, "If..." Before she could finish her sentence, Sher Chonli cut her off and said, "Mr. Fan has said that if he does not say anything, you are not allowed to leave the Baoyu brothel." Si Qing'er was angry. She finally understood that it was not that he needed her, but rather that he wanted her dead. She was just a woman. Even if she had some connection to the third prince, if the commissioner of the Overwatch Council had spoken, how could she say no? In this world, there was no official who would go against the Overwatch Council for the sake of a prostitute. Not even the princes would do something like that. If Mr. Fan wanted to destroy her, it would be easier than killing an ant. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, a little absent-mindedly. Sher Chonli said, "Mr. Fan? Oh, no. I'm going to make some small changes to the Baoyu brothel. I think Lady Qing'er will be of some use in this. Perhaps in the future, all the brothels in the Qing kingdom will need these changes." Si Qing'er was shocked. The Baoyu brothel's business was doing well, so the big boss had already used some of his capital to open up more branches in other provinces. But as of now, the brothel business in the Qing kingdom did not have a large share. As for changes, This was how the brothel business had been run since ancient times. Unless, like the big boss, the brothel made some changes to its operations. Was Fan Xian really going to go crazy and stop all the prostitutes in the world from selling? But the problem was, if the prostitutes did not sell, and if the pimps did not take in customers, would it still be a brothel? Sure, Chomley did not know what she was thinking, and so he followed the instructions of his teacher and said, "First, the girls in the brothel, from this day forward, are to change their death contracts to living contracts. This will be for 5 years, and when the time is up, they will be free to go. Second, the Bayou brothel must have a doctor to ensure that the girls are healthy, and only then can they receive customers. Third," before he finished, Si Chinger was confused and asked, "Change to living contracts? What is the need for that?" Sure Chomley explained, "Sir, ahem, I was wrong again. I thought that in this line of work, 5 years is the limit. We have to give people something to think about. If they think that they can only be ridden by others for the rest of their lives, and that there's no chance of them being redeemed, the girls will be in a bad mood. Naturally, they will not be able to treat the guests well." Si Chinger mockingly said, "5 years is up. Do you think we, poor women, can stop selling? Who is going to remove their registration?" The brothels of the Qing kingdom were not registered. Once a prostitute became a prostitute, she could not leave the brothel for the rest of her life, unless she was redeemed or the government had given them a special order. According to what was said before, the Bayou brothel signed a living contract for 5 years. After 5 years, the prostitutes in the brothel would not be able to escape. Regarding this question, Sure Chomley did not answer. Master Xian had said that he would deal with it in the future. Si Chinger mockingly said, "As for the doctors, that is even more ridiculous. The girls in the brothel are of low status, and no doctor would be willing to visit them. It is difficult to even see a patient. So how could there be a doctor who would be willing to stay in the brothel? Would the men be willing to lose face like that?" Sang One, who had been silent this entire time, smiled and said, "The commissioner said that he has many students in the 3rd Bureau of the Overwatch Council. Hiring a few doctors would not be a problem." Si Chinger gave a wry smile and thought to herself that the 3rd Bureau of the Overwatch Council was the poison department that everyone feared. Was he going to become a doctor? She increasingly felt that Fan Xian was a man who only knew how to dream. She mockingly said, "So what if there are doctors? Even if the girls are clean, who can guarantee that the guests will not suffer from venereal diseases?" Sure Chomley felt a headache coming on and said this, "I do not have a good idea." It was not that he did not have a good idea. It was that Fan Xian's idea of industrializing prostitution had run into the problem of not being able to popularize condoms. Listen to the last few things first. He coughed and continued to say, "From now on, things like forced buying and selling cannot happen again. If something like this happens again, you will be held responsible." He stared into Si Chinger's eyes until she lowered her head. Things like young prostitutes cannot happen again. There should be a rule for drawing water, and it should be based on the brands of the girls. The girls should have 3 days off every month, and they can do whatever they want. As Big Boss Sure continued to speak, not only did Si Chinger's face change, but even Sang One was dazzled. Finally, Si Chinger could not help but open her eyes wide and say, "If this goes on, is the Bayou brothel a brothel or a charity hall?" Sure Chomley looked at her and said, "The master has said that you are someone who was raised by Yuan Xian. Logically speaking, he should punish you. But because of your poor background, he will give you a chance to redeem yourself. You do not need to worry about whether the Bayou brothel is a brothel or a charity hall. In any case, you should follow Lady Sang's lead and do your business. If you succeed in this endeavor, you can spread it all over the world. In the future, hundreds of thousands of girls in this brothel will be indebted to you. Consider it repaying the debt you have owed over the past few months." At this point, Sure Chomley finally brought up Fan Xian's name without hesitation. Si Chinger was silent, and no one knew what she was thinking. Her face was full of fear. In fact, Sure Chomley's heart was full of fear. Although the Bayou brothel would be monitored by Sang One, who had already joined the 1st Bureau of the Overwatch Council, he was a scholar and a student of Fan Xian. Would he never be able to become an official? Would he only be able to stay in a brothel and be the owner of a brothel? He looked at Sang-won and found that this woman, who had been a singer, was calm and steady. It did not seem as if she was troubled by this. A few days later, there was an autumn rain midway, and it was mournful and rustling, forcefully turning the clear autumn air into a cold, rainy night. The Bayou brothel had been taken over by Fan Sien, and the second prince had already sensed an ominous omen. He had begun to make arrangements. Fan Sien, on the other hand, appeared to be rather relaxed. These few days he did not go to the first bureau, nor did he go to Xinfeng restaurant to eat buns. Instead, he went to the Imperial College, and with a group of young teachers, he organized the carriage of books he had brought back from northern Qi. The autumn wind blew, and the water droplets that had been hanging on the clouds for a while finally fell. They were so sparse that it was irritating. From Dambo bookstore, Fan Sien walked north for a while, and then he arrived at the gate of the Imperial College. A large area here was managed by the Imperial College and the Tungwen Pavilion. The government offices that had been set up in the first year of the Qin calendar had long been dismantled. Fan Sien raised his black umbrella and walked among the students of the Imperial College. Occasionally, he would nod and greet the students who respectfully greeted him. Although his status was different from before, the emperor had not removed him from his fifth-level official position. Furthermore, he had given verbal orders for him to come to the Imperial College when he had time. Although he did not like being a teacher and had never come to class, he used his official position to come to the Imperial College to read books and hide from the wind and rain outside. He was very willing to do so. The first day he came to the Imperial College, the students could not help but be surprised. It had been almost a year since Sir Fan Jr. had come to the Imperial College. When the students thought of this young man, who now held a position in the Overwatch Council, they could not help but feel a sense of conflict and fear. They were not as enthusiastic as they had been a year ago. It was not until a few hours later that they realized Sir Fan Jr. was as easy to get along with as he had been in the past that they became lively again. Arriving outside the study that the Imperial College had left for him, Fan Sien put away his umbrella and looked at the gloomy weather outside. He could not help but frown and push open the door to enter. Inside the room, a few of the Imperial College's teachers were organizing the books that Zhuang Mohan had given them. For the kingdom of Qing, the books in this carriage had a very beautiful symbolic meaning. The emperor greatly valued them, so the Imperial College did not dare to be negligent. The work of copying and maintaining the books was being carried out in an orderly manner. Seeing Sir Fan enter, the teachers hurriedly stood up and bowed. Fan Sien smiled and returned the greeting. The people in front of him were all mediocre and unaccomplished people. Because it was difficult for him to repair Zhuang Mohan's books by himself, he had forcibly taken them from the Imperial College. They had gotten along quite well over the past few days. The black cloth umbrella was placed in a corner, and water began to seep through the floor. There was a dark stove in the room, and as the two warmed, Fan Sien suddenly felt the humidity in the room increase. Feeling a little uncomfortable, he loosened his collar and said, "It's not good to be too wet. The weather is not cold yet. Sir, let us endure it for a while. How about we put out the stove?" One of the teachers explained, "Books need a certain temperature to be stored. It's not good to be too cold." Fan Sien knew this and said, "It's not winter yet. It should be fine to leave these books in the room. It's not good to be too damp either." Everyone agreed and began to bury their heads in their work. The Imperial College had inherited the style of the kingdom of Qing's court. It paid attention to practical matters and was not easy to talk about. It was very different from northern Qi. Fan Sien sat back down at his table, but before he had time to start working, he was asked to leave. Someone wanted to see him. "Why have you returned to the Imperial College today?" Fan Sien was a little surprised to see Shu Wu the scholar sitting in a chair, and he bowed respectfully. After his father-in-law, the prime minister, had stepped down and the minister of the Board of Rights had been hanged, the civil officials in the court had become a mess. Some were secretly watching Fan Sien, and some were following the Eastern Palace. Instead, it was the second prince, who had always been quiet, who, because of his many years of business and literary fame, had the most support from the civil officials. Shu Wu the scholar had once been a student of Zhuang Mohan and had always had a great reputation. In terms of seniority, he was second to none in the court. But because he had passed the imperial examination in Northern Wei, he was now an official in the kingdom of Qin, so there was always a problem. In the turmoil of the 5th year of the Qin calendar, he had accidentally obtained the greatest benefit. Although he had been stripped of his position as Chancellor of the Imperial College, the original scholar of the Tunwen Pavilion had been implicated in the spring examination incident and had been removed from his position. Shu Wu the scholar was extremely noble. The scholar of the Tunwen Pavilion was extremely noble. With the removal of the Prime Minister and the absence of a new Prime Minister, the scholar of the Tunwen Pavilion had to enter the palace to discuss matters. He had truly entered the center of the Qin court and was equivalent to a prime minister. No matter how powerful Fan Xian was in front of him, he was still just an unranked official. Of course, Shu Wu the scholar was not stupid enough to see Fan Xian as a common official. If that was the case, he would not have come to find Fan Xian today. If Commissioner Fan can calmly return to the Imperial College, why can't I? Shu Wu joked with Fan Xian, who was about the same age as his son. It's cold outside, and you, a young man, know how to enjoy life and hide in the Imperial College. What? You don't want the Overwatch Council to be drenched in the rain? Cold wind and rain outside? Fan Xian did not know if Shu Wu the scholar's words had a hidden meaning. He smiled, not knowing how to respond. After Chanli took over the Baiyue house, Yin Bingyun's actions began to unfold. First, he used the pressure of the Overwatch Council to force the Ministry of Justice to bypass the capital government. He directly issued an arrest warrant, focusing on a few crimes, and began to track down Yuan Meng. But Yuan Meng could really hide. Under the cover of King Jing's son, Hong Cheng, no one knew where she was hiding. Fan Xian was not in a hurry. After all, issuing the arrest warrant was to lay the groundwork for what would happen next. The later Yuan Meng was caught, the better. In Yan Bingyun's plan, everything was connected. As long as he could achieve the results he wanted, it was fine. Just 2 days ago, rumors began to spread throughout the capital. It was said that the brothel owner Yuan Meng, who the Ministry of Justice had been searching for, was actually the mistress of King Jing's son, Li Hongsheng. Rumors spread easily, especially since Yuan Meng and Li Hongsheng were in a relationship. So, the capital was abuzz with discussion. Li Hongsheng's reputation was like a piece of juicy meat on a hot day, and it was only a matter of time before his reputation became worse. Li Hongsheng and the second prince were friends, and this was something everyone knew. Not long after, another rumor began to spread. The famous Baiyue house in the capital was, in fact, the second prince. The case of the missing prostitutes being investigated by the Ministry of Justice was inextricably linked to the royal family. These rumors were very convincing. For example, Yuan Ming used to be a popular figure on Lujing River, but aside from the prince, no one had ever seen her take on any other customers. Another rumor was that on a certain day, the second prince had a long conversation with Commissioner Fan of the Overwatch Council outside of the Baiyue house. Although no one knew what the conversation was about, the next day, the Fan family sold their shares of the Baiyue house to a mysterious businessman named Shi. These rumors were, of course, the work of the 8th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. When Fan Xian was forced to take up his post during the spring examination, he became the idol of the world scholars. The Qin Kingdom's Wening headquarter office, when it came to creating an image, they were very good at it. When it came to pouring dirty water, they did it very well. Of course, as the rumors spread, the people of the capital learned that the original owner of the Baiyue house was actually the second master of the Fan family. The reputation of the Fan family was affected by this. But the source of the rumors was in the hands of the Fan family. They randomly tossed out a few stories about Commissioner Fan beating his brother, the old minister punishing the family, the second master breaking his leg, and the howling of evil in the garden. The Fan family selling the brothel at a loss was enough to shock the people of the capital. In addition, the Fan family no longer had anything to do with the Baiyue house, so the rumors quickly died down. When it came to controlling public opinion, Fan Xian was very familiar with it. Back then, Wu Zhu had written a few thousand leaflets, and he was able to chase the eldest princess out of the palace. Now, he was dealing with the second prince, who was even more immature. Therefore, the people of the capital always believed that the second prince and Li Hongsheng, who did not have any shares in the Baoyu house, were the true culprits behind the Baoyu house case. Fan Xian, on the other hand, was an innocent man. The Fan family must have had their reasons for doing so. Yan Bingyun's next step was to deal with the money between the second prince and the Cui family. Not even Fan Xian knew the specifics, but he trusted Yan Bingyun's abilities. He didn't want to get involved in this. Shu Wu, the scholar, looked at him and said with concern, "Did you know that yesterday the capital government accepted the Baoyu house case? Your second son's crime is not light. He committed murder, silenced witnesses, and forced prostitution. Today is the day he will be tried." Fan Xian gave a wry smile and said, "It is unfortunate that our family has produced such an unfilial son." Shu Wu shook his head and said, "The capital government has not yet gone to the manor to ask for him. I think they have other plans. Mr. Fan, the word trial is the most harmful. There is not much room for negotiation in a criminal case. If the capital government continues with the trial, the emperor will be alerted. I don't think it will end well." After this conversation, Fan Xian knew where the scholar stood. He was speaking on behalf of the civil servants in the court, and he was advising the Fan family to live in peace with the second prince. Not to mention the problem of the court's reputation, these elders believed that when two tigers fought, one would be hurt. Both Fan Xian and the second prince were the best of the Qin kingdom's younger generation. It didn't matter who lost in this fight. It would be a loss for the Qin kingdom. Of course, most people did not think Fan Xian had the right to fight a prince, even though he was the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Fan Xian understood this, and so he knew that the scholar in front of him was trying to make peace for his sake. He couldn't help but feel touched. He smiled warmly and said, "Thank you for your advice. I believe you have already met the second prince." Shu Wu nodded. Ever since Fan Xian returned to the capital from northern Qi, he had been at odds with the second prince. The Overwatch Council had arrested many of the second prince's officials, and if he wanted to make peace, he had to first ask the second prince for his opinion. He did not expect the second prince to be so easy to talk to, and politely asked Shu Wu to speak on Fan Xian's behalf. Hearing Shu the scholar's words, Fan Xian laughed coldly in his heart. The second prince's nickname was Stone. How could he be so easy to get along with? The two sides had already shed all pretenses of cordiality, and he had been forced to send his brother to a distant foreign land. There had to be an explanation for the matter of his father-in-law being taken down by the eldest princess and the second prince, right? Furthermore, the spies of the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council had already sent word that the second prince had already brought back the 3 killers of the Baoyu brothel, who had been hidden in secret. They were preparing to bring Fan Xian back to the capital's court. The second prince had asked Shu Wu to speak on his behalf to temporarily calm Fan Xian down. Fan Xian was not that stupid, though. He respectfully offered tea to Shu Wu and said, "This has nothing to do with the council, and it has nothing to do with me. I have been guarding the Imperial College these past few days because I was afraid someone might misunderstand." Shu Wu could not help but smile wryly. The wrinkles on his face were full of pity, and he said, "Why fight with him? Even if we win this time, so what? No matter how many times we win, it cannot compare to the happiness of the emperor." Fan Xian's heart jumped, and he knew that these words were true. He felt even more grateful to the old scholar in front of him. Although he had other thoughts in his heart, he still responded warmly. "Since you have spoken, then I have nothing else to say. As long as the capital government leaves the Fan family some face, the Ministry of Justice case will not be investigated too deeply." In the eyes of an old official like Shu Wu, Fan Xian's reply seemed a bit rash. In the officialdom, there is always a need to conceal one's dignity. How could there be such a clear and unmistakable reason to talk about such illegal matters in front of the Prime Minister? But he also knew that Fan Xian's personality was like this. He smiled in satisfaction and did not say anything. He only watched the rain outside the window of the Imperial College. 3 li from the Jingdo government office, by the side of the Imperial Mountain Road, the autumn rain was falling heavily. The case of the missing prostitutes in the Bayou brothel had already been investigated. Although the bodies had not yet been found, the capital government had already found the 3 murderers involved in the murder. If the 3 men who killed the prostitutes were arrested and brought to justice, then they would be able to claim that the second master of the Fan family was the mastermind behind the incident. This would be a huge blow to the Fan family, and it would also clear the second prince's name. So, these 3 men were important figures. The second prince's people still did not understand why the Fan family had sent these 3 men to the capital government after carrying out the family's punishment. Did this not give them something to use against them? But it was not until the Fan family sold the Bayou brothel and began to investigate Yuan Meng and point their finger at Li Hongsheng that the second prince realized that Fan Xian was using these 3 men to make him feel better. He thought he had chosen peace, and so his reaction was delayed for a few days. But the second prince still felt that Fan Xian was being unwise. As long as these 3 men were in his hands, where could the fat, pockmarked man of the Fan family run to? Now, the second prince was truly angry. Fan Xian really did not know how high the sky was and how deep the earth was. He dared to make a move against the second prince. Even the ghosts knew that the rumors in the capital were spread by him. At this time, although Crown Prince Hongsheng was also very depressed, he could not go to the Fan Manor to fight Fan Xian. This was because King Jing was the first to get angry. After a beating, he locked him up in the manor to avoid the storm that was brewing in the capital. Watch him carefully. Do not let anyone else have the opportunity to come in contact with him. Do not give them the opportunity to retract their statements. Fan Wujiu, one of the 8 generals of the second prince's manor, had a gloomy expression on his face. He said to the bailiffs sent by the capital government, "If you fail this mission, be careful of your own life." The bailiffs of the capital government nervously nodded. He was not nervous about this mission, but he was nervous about facing the 8 generals of the second prince. Yushan Road was only 3 miles away from the capital government. If it were not for the fact that he wanted to avoid suspicion, Fan Wujiu would have personally escorted these 3 men to the capital government's prison. The carriage began to move, and in the dark autumn rain, Fan Wujiu watched from afar. The carriage traveled in the rain, as usual. There were not many people on the street, and only a few passers-by with umbrellas in their hands walked by. At this time, the passers-by began to move. They flipped their umbrellas and pulled out sharp, black-stained weapons. Calmly, they stabbed into the carriage. Fan Wujiu was shocked and rushed in that direction, but he was still some distance away from the carriage. Seeing the speed at which these people were moving, he knew he would not be able to save them in time. The sharp needles were as sharp as tofu. They pierced into the walls of the carriage and killed the 3 people inside. The passers-by pulled out the needles and did not make any unnecessary movements. Holding their umbrellas, they walked into the alleys on the side of the street and disappeared into the rain. Fresh blood flowed from the carriage. Fan Wujiu rushed over with a cold face. He pulled open the curtain and his face changed. The wounds all showed how professional the person who did it was. It was only a simple stab, and they were already dead. Fan Wujiu could not help but take a deep breath. He began to worry for the second prince. To kill the 3 people in the carriage so cleanly was already difficult. What was even more frightening was that the other side knew exactly when they would move the witnesses. It seemed that the Overwatch Council had hidden many spies in the second prince's camp, which was why they were able to control the timing and location of the attack so well. This assassination was so perfectly planned that it looked so natural and simple. It was like eating a meal, and it was not very thrilling. Only an expert like Fan Wujiu could find a soul-stirring feeling in such a plain, killing situation. He did not need to think to know who had done it. Other than the assassins of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council, who always hid in the dark, who else could have done it? His face grew paler. He could not help but think, if those passers-by had been trying to assassinate him, would he have been able to survive? Everyone in the second prince's camp seemed to have underestimated Fan Xian's power. That was because the new generation of people in the kingdom of Qing did not know how terrifying the Overwatch Council was. Fan Wujiu nervously rubbed the dagger in his sleeve. For the first time, he felt that he should leave the second prince and save himself. My chess skills are not good. I play chess because I don't want to take the pieces, Fan Xian said with a face full of shame. He was playing chess with Shu Wu at the Imperial College. The court had ended early, and the disaster relief in the south was almost over. That was why Shu the scholar had so much free time. After only 2 rounds of chess, the old man found that Fan Xian, such an intelligent and quick-witted genius, was a complete and utter lousy chess player. He could not help but change his expression. He felt that playing this kind of chess, even if he won, would not be fun. Shu Wu sighed and said, Fan Xian, I see that you are very clever in everything you do. How is it that you are so lousy at chess? The two of them casually talked about the matters of the court. Because Minister Fan rarely talked about such things in the manner, and the Overwatch Council could not investigate their disputes in court, Fan Xian listened with great interest. He smelled some of the important matters of court that he could not touch with at his current rank. Now, Yin Xiaoi was the governor in the north and endlessly stretched out his hand for silver. The small battles in the south were also ongoing. The kingdom of Qing was currently lacking in silver. Fan Xian's heart was now at ease. As long as the emperor needed silver, the palace treasury would fall into his hands next year. The eldest princess was good at scheming, but when it came to making money from business, it was not very reassuring. The rain had stopped, and Fan Xian did not have the right to ask the old man to stay for a meal. He respectfully saw the scholar out the door, then turned around and returned to the room. He began to look through the collection of books that Master Zhuang had given him. After the teachers had left, he still had not left. He held a book in his hands, lost in thought. He knew what had happened in the capital today, but he did not take it to heart. The 3 people were already dead, but the families of the dead prostitutes had now come to the capital government to complain, pointing their fingers at the Fan family. Of course, Fan Xian would not kill them to silence them. The 3 people who had died today had been secretly hidden by the second prince. If he killed him, the second prince would not be able to report it to the emperor. Although Fan Xian was not a good person, he did not have the heart to kill the victims. In fact, he understood that if he did not care about his status as the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, the resources and power he held were far greater than the second prince's. If there were no accidents in this battle, of course, he would win. But the world did not know this. The only thing that Fan Xian cared about was the attitude of the emperor in the palace. If the emperor felt that these little bastards playing around was nothing, then Fan Xian could continue to play. He actually had a good grasp of the emperor's thoughts. The second prince was just a whetstone. Although he was used to sharpen the crown prince, he was also used to sharpen the future Overwatch Council Director Fan Jr. Looking at Director Fan Jr.'s methods and thoughts, it seemed like a good choice. Of course, if Fan Xian really did go too far, the palace would only need to issue an edict to settle matter. He was not worried that the emperor would hurt him because of this matter. On the contrary, he would laugh at himself and think, everyone is a bastard. You, the emperor, can't kiss one egg and kiss another. The rain in Jingdo stopped. He quietly avoided everyone's gaze and left the Imperial College. In a clothing store, he took off his outer garment, revealing the pure work clothes underneath. He then took a normal outer garment from the hands of the lowly shopkeeper and put it on. Only then did he flip over his rain hat to hide his face and disappear into the streets of Jingdo. The rain had already stopped. The leaden clouds in the sky seemed to have been melted by the sun. They gradually thinned and flattened, then gradually split apart. Following the arc of the sky, they flowed toward the 4 corners of the sky, revealing a large piece of blue sky in the center and the particularly fresh autumn day after their victory. The sun shone on the outside of the yamen of the capital government. A few rays of light penetrated into the hall, clearly illuminating the just and honorable sign in the hall. There was already a crowd gathered outside the capital government, waiting for the prefectural magistrate to personally investigate the Baoyue brothel case, which had recently caused a stir. This case had a background, a murder, and involved a prostitute that made people's imaginations run wild. It happened in a place of pleasure, and it satisfied many of the aesthetic requirements of the people of Jingdou. Thus, it was the focus of everyone's attention. If one did not know much about this case, it would be embarrassing to speak up. If the carriage drivers did not know the whole story of this case, they would not have the face to drive a carriage for a customer. Fan Xian disguised himself as a passerby and blended into the crowd. He looked into the yamen and couldn't help but feel a strange feeling in his heart. The capital government was the most important yamen, and the changes in personnel in the last 2 years could not escape his involvement. He was afraid that once this matter was over, the Jingdou prefectural magistrate would have to apologize and resign. Chapter 299. The previous prefect of the capital, Mei Zhili, was a student of Lady Lu's father. He had always supported the Fan Manor, and during the Guo Black Fist case, he had helped Fan Xian a great deal. After Fan Xian was assassinated on Yalan Street, Mei Zhili, as the prefect of the capital, was punished as well. His salary was forfeited for a year, and he was put on probation. But no one could have predicted that the next year there would be another assassination attempt. After much trouble, Mei Zhili was removed from his position and sent to another county. The Fan Manor and Mei Zhili still kept in touch with each other, so Fan Xian knew that Mei Zhili was very happy to leave the capital government. In the hall, there was a large row of people who looked very poor. They were kneeling in front of the table and crying. These people were the relatives of the prostitutes who had died in the Baoyu brothel. As they cried, they cursed the Fan family, and they begged for justice. The current prefect of the capital government, Tian Jingmu, looked very righteous. His lips twitched, and his eyes were wet. It seemed as if he had been moved by the words of the victims. He immediately ordered the servants of the government to go to the Baoyu brothel and arrest the suspects. They investigated the crime scene, and he solemnly expressed his desire to do justice for the people. He ordered people to go to the Fan Manor and asked for the second master of the Fan family, who had committed all sorts of crimes. He did not mention the names of Yuan Ming and the others. Fan Xian watched coldly from within the crowd. He could see the slight panic in the magistrate Tian Jingmu's eyes. He knew that the magistrate knew that the 3 thugs involved in the murder of the prostitutes were already dead. Fan Xian did not react to the cries of the victims in the hall. After all, the Baoyu brothel was responsible for the deaths of the prostitutes. He and his brother were only cursed at, and that was nothing. He was just wondering if these victims were real or if they had been arranged by the second prince. The results of the Overwatch Council's investigation had not yet been released, but he had to do something about it. The trials of the Jingdou government were very tedious. This kind of show had been performed many times over the past thousands of years. Although the commoners who were watching the excitement still enjoyed it, Fan Xian's mind had already turned elsewhere. The reason why he came here today was because he reckoned that something was about to happen. His father-in-law, the treacherous Prime Minister Lin Ruofu, was forced to step down in dejection. Although the root cause was his sudden appearance and the emperor's heart, the actual fuse was Wu Bowen, who had died under the grape trellis. Because Peng Tingsheng of Shandong Road had incited the Wu family and killed Wu Bowen's son, Wu Bowen's widow had come to the capital to complain. On the way, she had been intercepted by the people of the Prime Minister's manor, but had been saved by the second prince and Li Hongxin. Would the second prince do the same today? Fan Xian did not hold a grudge against his father-in-law, but he remembered the second prince's methods. Logically speaking, a true expert at scheming would never repeat his methods. However, he had seen through the second prince. Although the second prince liked to squat on the chair and put on an unfathomable expression, after so many days of probing, he had finally revealed the immaturity and stubbornness of a young man. Aside from the terrifying power of the Overwatch Council, Fan Xian had an advantage over the second prince. Although he was younger than the second prince in this life, in reality, he had much more experience. Not long after, the capital government's bailiffs had brought back the owner of the Baoyu brothel, Xichen. There were also people who were looking for clues in the lake behind the Bayou brothel. But there were no direct witnesses, so they did not know where the bodies were buried. Fan Xian looked at the woman kneeling on the stone floor and wondered how she would deal with the situation. Would she be intimidated by the pressure and be more obedient, or would she still be unwilling to give up? As for the bodies that were buried in the Bayou brothel, the Overwatch Council had already worked with Shi Chanli to retrieve them one night and bury them in the suburbs of the capital. They were waiting for the case to be concluded, and then they would find a way to notify their real families. Si Qing'er, who was in the hall, bit her lips. Although she did not say anything, it was only when the old man above her asked her a question that she answered. Her heart was clear as a mirror. Before she came, Mr. Shi had already told her what she could say and what she could not. Fortunately, the owner of the house was not too strict. He did not ask her to do anything dirty, and he did not ask her to cover up for the second master of the Fan family. She only told him what she wanted. So, before the capital government's magistrate could begin his sentence, she told him the name of the owner of the Bayou brothel and what he had done. But when it came to the murder of the prostitutes, she was adamant that it was Yuan Ming who was wanted by the Ministry of Justice. Although the owner knew about it, he did not participate in it. The capital government's magistrate was pleased with how smoothly the kneeling woman had answered. But the more he listened, the more it seemed as if she was trying to clear the name of the second master of the Fan family. And the second prince had already told him that this matter could not be related to Yuan Ming. His face darkened, and he threw the stick in front of him and shouted, "This woman is very cunning. Beat her." The capital government's bailiffs picked up sticks and began to torture Si Qing'er. Si Qing'er gritted her teeth and endured the pain. She knew that the Fan family was watching. She no longer had the support of the third prince, and if she wanted to rely on the Fan family to survive in the capital, then she would have to go down the dark path. She endured the pain and did not speak, but it was not as if she could not scream. She cried out in pain, and there was a hidden bitterness in her voice. She floated around the capital government's yamen, and it made the people who were watching feel sorry for her. Fan Xian watched this from the outside, and he was surprised by the woman's cruelty. After the torture, Si Qing'er continued to say the same thing she had said before. The capital government's magistrate was about to begin another round of torture when the officials who had gone to the Fan Manor to arrest Fan Xi'ja came back, covered in dust and looking defeated. This group of people had gone to the Fan Manor to arrest Fan Xi'ja, and they had used the capital government's sign to force their way in. But at this time, Fan Xi'ja had probably already reached Songzhou, and he was hugging Lady Yenner in his carriage, sighing about how difficult it was to leave his homeland. The bailiffs were about to ask a few more questions, but Lady Lu led a group of servants and beat them out with brooms. Hearing his subordinates being humiliated, the capital government's magistrate was not angry at all. Instead, he was secretly happy, and he shouted, "How dare these nobles be so presumptuous? How dare they harbor a criminal?" He made up his mind. Tomorrow, he would report this matter to the Fan Manor and see how they would answer for it. Fan Xian looked on coldly, but he was not in a hurry. With Lady Lu at home, he knew what his aunt was capable of. How could he have handled this matter without thinking it through? Furthermore, Mr. Yin Binghe was very trustworthy when it came to scheming. Back in the day, he had the entire northern Qi kingdom in the palm of his hand, so there was no way he would be able to handle a criminal case like this. As expected, the crowd outside the manor parted, and a few people walked in. The one leading them was Fan Xian's partner on his first visit to the capital government. It was Mr. Zheng, an official of the Fan Manor and a famous scribe of the capital government. Mr. Zheng was famous, and so he did not need to kneel. He simply bowed to the magistrate and said, "Sir, what you say is absurd. Everyone in the capital knows that the Fan Manor has always been strict and fair. There is no such thing as harboring a criminal. As for what the second young master has done, you will have to investigate it in detail. The Fan Manor will not be biased." The magistrate of the capital government, Tian Jingmu, knew that the official in front of him was a famous scribe in the capital, and the lawyer next to him, Song Shuren, was even more famous for being a troublesome litigator. For the Fan family to put on such a show, they must be prepared to go the open route. His face darkened, and he shouted, "If you are not biased, then why don't you bring the criminal in?" In the cold autumn weather, Song Shuren waved his fan and laughed. Capturing criminals is the business of the capital government. Since when did it become someone else's business? Tian Jingmu laughed coldly. Your second young master has committed a crime, so of course he must hand over the criminal. If he does not hand over the criminal, then is that not harboring a criminal? It is written clearly in the law of the Qing kingdom. Song Shuren, you should shut up. Song Shuren did not listen and laughed. The law of the Qing kingdom states clearly that the criminal must first hand over the criminal. But sir, the second young master of the Fan family disappeared 8 days ago. Where are we supposed to find him? Tian Jingmu was so angry that he laughed. Haha, what a ridiculous excuse. Song Shuren looked distressed. Let the magistrate know that this is not an excuse. A few days ago, the Fan family reported to the capital government that the second young master had done many illegal things, but you did not pay any attention to them. At the time, they also said that the second young master had fled to escape punishment and asked the capital government to quickly send bailiffs to arrest him. He waved his paper fan again and said in a pained voice, Minister Fan and Sir Fan Jr. would not hesitate to put justice before family. How could they be harboring a criminal? Tian Jingmu slammed his gavel and couldn't help but curse. When did the Fan family report to us? And when did they report Fan Xizha missing? How come I didn't know about this? Don't even think about muddying the waters and getting out of this mess. Whether or not there was, please look into the case file, and you will know. Song Shuren put on a fake smile and cupped his hands in salute. Tian Jingmu's heart froze, and he immediately came to his senses. He did not call for the bailiffs to examine the case file on the spot. Instead, he found an excuse to leave the court. He and the advisor went to the study and carefully looked over the case file from the past few days. When he saw the case file, which clearly stated that the second young master of the Fan family had fled to escape punishment, the capital magistrate almost fainted from anger. There was no such thing, so how could there be such a file? The capital government was heavily guarded. Even if the Overwatch Council were to make a move, it would be difficult not to alert anyone. How could the Fan family have such power? To be able to play such a trick without anyone knowing? Tian Jingmu's face was extremely ugly. He knew that there was a traitor in the capital government, but he could not immediately tell whether it was the magistrate or the official registrar who had done this. When Tian Jingmu returned to the court, he was no longer as stubborn as he had been at the beginning. After all, the case file was here, and during the examination, both the magistrate and the official registrar were beside him. Even if he was willing to risk destroying the Fan family's case file, there was no way he could hide it. This way, even if Fan Xizha was found guilty, the Fan family had already made the first contribution. The Fan family's second young master had fled to escape punishment, and the Fan family did not purposely hide it. If this continued, how could the Fan family be dragged into this mess? In the end, the emperor would charge the Fan family with lax governance and cut their titles and salaries. It would be impossible to achieve the results that the second prince had requested. The capital magistrate had a headache, but he was not willing to give up. With a dark face, he continued to fight with the Fan family's large team of litigation masters. The capital government temporarily retreated from the court. Fan Xian knew that they had done enough on the surface. From now on, Fan Xizha would become someone who fled to escape punishment. When Fan Xian was truly in power, he would find a way to clear his name, and the Fan family would finally be able to escape. As for the owner of the Baoyu house, Shi Changli, because he had taken over after the incident, no matter how unreasonable the capital government was, they would not be able to bring him to justice. Fan Xian could not help but laugh. He even talked about the case with a man who was standing next to him. The families of the victims were being led by the bailiffs to a place behind the government to rest. His lips curled up, and he said goodbye to the man and followed them. His eyes glanced at the corner of the street, and under the eaves, there was a man who looked like a scholar. The families of the prostitutes were making their way to the corner of the street, and Just as they were about to disappear from the sight of the onlookers, 4 or 5 masked men came out of nowhere. In their hands were shining knives, and these masked assassins danced wildly. Their attacks were ruthless, and they cut down on the bodies of the victims. The streets were filled with cries and wails. The people who were watching the show also shouted and fled in all directions. Fan Xian stood under a large locust tree and squinted as he watched the scene unfold. He was not worried, and in fact, he underestimated the power of the second prince. They were using the same tactic, and their actions were very clumsy. Last time, they succeeded in framing the prime minister because the emperor wanted them dead. The emperor did not want to kill them all, and now they were doing the same thing on the street. Were they not afraid that the emperor would laugh at them for being so simplistic? As for the lives of the victims, Fan Xian was not worried about them. Sure enough, a group of passers-by appeared out of nowhere at the end of the street and directly mixed into the battle. They quickly hid the victims of the murder behind them and faced the killers. Passers-by again, Fan Xian's favorite passers-by. The passers-by were not wielding knives, but were instead wielding spikes specially prepared by the Overwatch Council. With a few moves, they broke through the blades of the assassins and closed in. Their attacks were clean and efficient, and their style was simple and powerful. They seemed to have traces of Sir Wu Zhu. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. He knew that this was because the true leader of the 6th Bureau, the Shadow, was Wu Zhu's admirer. The assassins sent by the second prince were actually quite skilled, but compared to the people of the 6th Bureau, their attacks were somewhat redundant. After a short fight, they were utterly defeated. These people instinctively wanted to escape, but the passers-by were like maggots on bones. There was nothing they could do. Clang! Clang! This sudden ambush and counter-ambush came to an abrupt end. The masked assassins fell miserably on the street, their bodies covered with a few miserable wounds, blood flowing everywhere. Fan Xian looked over and nodded. He was very satisfied with Yan Xiaoyan's arrangements. It did not matter if they were left alive, but they could not let these people escape under the watchful eyes of the public. Presumably, these assassins had the Overwatch Council's secret mark on them, so that they could frame Fan Xian. The result of this ambush was also within his expectations. The assassins raised by the princes could only be considered part-time assassins. When faced with the professionals of the 6th Bureau, they would naturally lose miserably. At this moment, something strange happened. In the corner of the street, the scholar who was hiding from the rain under the eaves suddenly floated out and entered the fray. He drew his sword, and with a free will, the light of the sword carried a pure Jinqi. The Jinqi on the sword was pure and violent, and it caused the puddles on the street to rise into the air. It transformed into a water arrow and went straight for one of the victims. What a powerful sword aura! It came from the hands of such a weak scholar. The swordsmen of the 6th Bureau, who were disguised as passers-by, could not react in time. They did not dare to fight against the white mist that mixed with the rain sword. They dodged to the side, and the sharp needles shot out from their elbows in an attempt to slow down this skilled swordsman's sword. With several chi-chi sounds, the spike only pierced through the lower hem of the scholar's robe and brought down a few strands of cloth. It was completely unable to block the might of his sword. With a pu sound, the unadorned sword had already pierced into the body of one of the victims, Xiaobayan, the most arrogant of the 8 generals of the second prince. He once said that he could defeat Fan Xian with one strike of the sword. He was the Xiaobayan who killed Fan Xian. Fan Xian recognized the scholar who was hiding from the rain under the eaves at first glance. But he did not expect that, with his status and power, he would be so shameless as to attack the victim's family. Everything was set in stone. Even if Xiaobayan killed the victim's family, so what? Fan Xian thought Xiaobayan was only here to monitor the situation. He did not expect Xiaobayan to throw away his pride and attack. So, his reaction was a little slow. The moment Xiaobayan drew his sword, he knew that since the 6th Bureau was there, his plan to frame him had failed. Although he was arrogant, he didn't have the confidence that he could kill all the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau in broad daylight on the streets of Jingdao. They lived in the shadows all year round. However, he still had to draw his sword because he couldn't accept it. He watched helplessly as his subordinates were stabbed by those passers-by, while the victims he wanted to kill, although terrified, were unharmed. This kind of complete failure made him angry, so he chose to draw his sword irrationally and violently. Killing the victim's family was a good thing. At least it could save the second prince some face in his fight against Fan Xian. Plus, if even one of these prostitutes' family died, Fan Xian would have to spend a lot of time and energy explaining what had happened. His right hand, which was holding the hilt of his sword, felt a familiar vibration. He knew that the tip of his sword had once again pierced into a stranger's body. He was going to take away another innocent soul. He was satisfied, and he laughed arrogantly. He pulled his sword back and watched the victim's chest bleed. And then his smile immediately froze. Xie Bian was confident that his sword would not miss, and it did indeed pierce into the victim's body. The only strange thing was that the tip of the sword was a few inches away from the middle of the body. It was this distance that prevented his sword from killing the victim, and he had already lost his second chance to draw his sword. The victim in front of him was like a kite. He was miserably slanted, but he quickly flew to the right. He did not know what kind of power could pull a person in a direction that defied the laws of physics. Xie Bian unconsciously twisted his wrist and brought his sword up in front of his chest. He suddenly turned his head, but he only had time to see Fan Xian, who had just rushed over, retract his foot. Fan Xian, as a brilliant swordsman, he immediately sensed his opponent's aura. Amidst his sharp cry, he gathered all the power in his sword and pierced straight and unstoppable toward Fan Xian's face. At that moment, the passers-by of the 6th Bureau knew that Fan Xian had arrived. They protected the victim, who was still in shock, and retreated to a safe place. Fan Xian's kick had saved the victim's life, and he had no time to pull out his dagger. He looked at the cold light coming towards him, and he felt the cold air of the sword. He felt as if his eyelashes were going to fall off. Xie Bian raised his hand. Chi, chi, chi. 3 consecutive sounds rang out. 3 crossbow bolts were dipped in anti-air's poison. They flew against the wind of the sword and quickly flew towards Xie Bian's face. The tip of the sword was pointed at Xie Bian's face, and the crossbow bolts were also aimed at his face. The two of them clearly had no interest in competing in the thickest of skin. Fan Xian was silent, and he coldly twisted his body. He used his strong control of his body, and the cold sword brushed past his face. He punched Xie Bian's chest. The punch was full of jinqi, and it broke through the air like thunder. If it hit, Xie Bian's organs would be crushed. Xie Bian waved his left sleeve as if his life depended on it. A cloud appeared, and it brushed away the 2 small crossbows. He wanted to take Fan Xian's life with his sword, but he didn't expect Fan Xian to take such a risk and throw out his terrifying fist. He screamed and cut his wrist. His left hand turned into a palm, and he slapped Fan Xian's fist. There was a crisp crack, and Xie Bian's wrist was broken. Fan Xian, Xie Bian shouted angrily. It wasn't because he was afraid of Fan Xian Jinqi, but because when the fist and the palm collided, a faint yellow smoke exploded from between the two. Xie Bian didn't expect Fan Xian to use such a despicable method, even when he had the upper hand. At this moment, the poisonous smoke had entered his body, and his sword power had been exhausted. He was powerless to cut horizontally, and he was in a rush to meet Fan Xian's strange and tyrannical fist. He was wide open, and the last of the 3 arrows pierced into his shoulder. He was poisoned again. Fan Xian. Xie Bian cursed Fan Xian's name for the 3rd time. He knew he had underestimated Fan Xian's power. He forced the jinqi in his body to swing his sword to the west, aiming for Fan Xian's throat. It was a vicious attack. Xie Bian's body floated up into the air, ready to jump onto the roof of a house. He wanted to escape from this powerful, yet treacherous master. But how could Fan Xian let him escape? A gray shadow flashed by, and Fan Xian was already in midair. He had Xie Bian's body entangled. He extended his right arm and chopped down on Xie Bian's ankle. This palm knife was a small trick of the coffin breaker. Although it was attacking a corner that Siabayan didn't care about, it still did a lot of damage. Siabayan grunted. He felt as if his ankle had been crushed. An unbearable pain spread through half of his body, and it slowed his speed of escape. In that moment, Fan Xian silently made his move. He didn't know how many times he had attacked Siabayan. The two of them stood on the drizzling street again. They became two blurry shadows. One was gray, and the other was black. They tangled together. There was a series of muffled sounds. Siabayan's body was hit countless times by Fan Xian. Fan Xian had attacked too quickly, and so his Jinshi hadn't been used. Siabayan had used his decades of training to withstand the blows, but the tip of Fan Xian's sword was like the wind. It couldn't even touch Fan Xian's body. This reality made Siabayan feel hopeless. How could Fan Xian be so fast? Siabayan screamed. He shook his wrist, and his sword became a silver rain to protect his body. Finally, Fan Xian was forced to take a few steps back. There was a thud. Siabayan's trembling right hand was propped up against the ground. The tip of the sword was stabbed into the puddles of water. It trembled, and a few strange lines appeared on the surface of the water. Looking at Fan Xian, who looked calm, Siabayan felt pain in his body. It was as if there were countless knives cutting through his veins. He knew that Fan Xian's attacks had damaged his internal organs, and the poison in his body was starting to take effect. His right leg was about to lose its balance. Facing his opponent, who looked calm, Siabayan had lost the confidence to fight. 9. Siabayan knew that even if he didn't underestimate Fan Xian, he was no match for Fan Xian. He now had a completely different opinion of Fan Xian's power. He thought about it, and after saying the word 9, the wounds in his body flared up again. He coughed up a few streaks of blood and swallowed the last word. He looked at Fan Xian, and his eyes flashed with confusion. He still remembered when he was in the tea shop outside of the Baiwa brothel. He had boasted that he, by himself, could defeat Fan Xian. That was built on his confidence in himself and his judgment of Fan Xian. Although this young man, whose surname was Fan, had killed Cheng Jushu on Yalan Street last year, Siabayan did not believe that the son of an influential family could have the willpower to truly devote himself to the path of martial arts. He did not believe that he could possess such exquisite and practical killing skills. But who would have thought that such a rich young man had already entered the 9th level? 9th level. Siabayan coughed, but he still managed to squeeze out those 2 words. His right thumb moved slightly, and he pressed it against the hilt of his sword. Fan Xian's feet touched the ground, and his entire body shot towards Siabayan like an arrow. A black light flashed, and he used his best dagger to cut through the sword Siabayan had used to kill himself. At the same time, he mercilessly punched Siabayan's temple. Then, like a wisp of smoke, he retreated. It was as if he had never attacked. Siabayan fainted on the street in the dirty rainwater. His body was covered in wounds, and the water splashed everywhere. Fan Xian would not give a loser a chance to express his feelings or pose for a moment before he died. Finally, the bailiffs of the capital government arrived. The capital government magistrate heard the news, and he pretended to be surprised. Seeing the situation, his heart froze. He knew that the second prince's plan had been foiled. Looking at Fan Xian, who was smiling, Tian Jingmu did not know what to feel. Someone wanted to kill me. I happened to come to the capital government to listen to my brother's case, and I happened to run into them. Fan Xian's face was calm as he spoke, but his right hand was still trembling. Fortunately, I had a few capable subordinates with me. Otherwise, these people would not have succeeded. Siabayan, who had acted on his own, had not succeeded in killing himself. For Fan Xian, being able to obtain one of the 8 generals was a pleasant surprise. The 8 generals of the second prince's manor were not a secret in the capital. Today, so many people saw Siabayan assassinate the victim of the murder case. It was a great opportunity for the 8th Bureau to spread rumors. Fan Xian wanted to say thank you to Siabayan, who was lying on the ground. The capital government bailiffs took over the watch, and there was nothing else for Fan Xian to do. He did not need to reveal Siabayan's identity, as his subordinates would take care of it. I will hand this man over to you, sir. Fan Xian looked at the capital government magistrate with a smile that was not a smile. This man is evil. Please watch him carefully, sir. Fan Xian had no intention of taking Xie Bian back to the Overwatch Council. Even if he found out that the murder of the victim was ordered by the second prince, if it was the Overwatch Council that found out, it would be much weaker. He handed the unconscious Xie Bian over to the capital government. He had a dark plan in mind as well. Xie Bian was handed over alive. If he died in the future, things would become very interesting. The capital government magistrate was a third-rank official, and the Overwatch Council could not investigate him without permission. It was a rare opportunity for Fan Xian to kill him. How could Fan Xian miss it? If he missed it, even Yin Bingyan would scold him for being soft-hearted. In the capital, people had not yet recovered from the shock of what happened. Without a doubt, what happened outside the capital government would become a topic of conversation. In the eyes of the nobles who knew what was going on, the battle between the second prince and Fan Xian was tipping the scales of victory in favor of the second prince. That is, if the emperor did not object and the palace remained silent. His subordinates, who were disguised as passers-by, guarded Fan Xian as they walked into the manor. One of them saw Fan Xian's trembling right hand and thought he had been injured in the fight. Fan Xian smiled and said, "It's nothing. I'm just a little excited. It's been a few months since I've enjoyed something like this." This was the truth. The fight with Xie Bian had made Fan Xian excited. He seemed to enjoy this sort of work. Sometimes, he even thought that perhaps Yin Bingyan was more suited to be the head of the Overwatch Council, and that he was more suited to work for Yin Bingyan. However, the trembling of his right hand was not only due to excitement. Fan Xian gently rubbed his wrist. His originally sunny mood suddenly had an additional trace of haze. Chapter 300. During this period of time, the Overwatch Council, under the guidance of Commissioner Fan and Yin Bingyan Jr., had armed themselves to the teeth. They did not hesitate to tear into the second prince's faction, from officials to economic interests. With the Baoyu brothel incident as the catalyst, and with the assassination attempt outside the capital government as the root cause, they attacked the royal court and the Dasua Trading Company. They dug into the deepest recesses of the other party's soul, and with a flash of crafty thought, they pressed forward. First of all, it was no surprise that one of the 8 generals, Xie Bian, had suddenly died in the capital's prison. This gave the Overwatch Council a good excuse. The Overwatch Council sent 3 memorials to the palace, and finally, Tian Jingmu was suspended from his duties for further investigation. The stupid move that the second prince had made in order to protect himself had caused the council to link up with one another and directly remove the second prince's greatest support in the capital. On the other hand, Yin Bingyan had begun to use other methods to successfully control the supply routes from Xinyang to the capital. He had forced the Chui family into a state of panic, and no one knew how much money they had lost. They had no choice but to use the funds of the Jiangnan family in order to forcefully reopen the route to the north, which had been cut off by Xinzhong's death. The second prince's money began to shrink. The public opinion was not in favor of the second prince's faction. Although there were experts in the palace, they were not as effective and professional as the Overwatch Council. Compared to the propagandists of the 8th Bureau, the workers sent by the palace to the tea houses and taverns did not have the power to sway the hearts of the people. Although the Overwatch Council was ruthless, the people of the capital were still on the side of the Fan family. They felt that the missing second master of the Fan family had become a scapegoat for the second prince, which was why Fan Xian Jr. was so ruthless. As for Hongsheng, poor Crown Prince Jing, his reputation was even worse. Who told him to have an affair with Yuan Meng? Everyone in the capital knew that next spring, Li Hongsheng was going to marry the eldest daughter of the Fan family. But you ordered Fan Xizha, who was only 14 years old, to open a brothel and made him take the blame for the murder of a prostitute. Mother of Kerr, how could there be a brother-in-law in this world who would use his brother-in-law so shamelessly? For a period of time, the second prince's faction was beaten back step by step, be it in the officialdom or in other aspects. Their morale was low, and they had no strength to fight back. The only counterattack they attempted was the imperial censorate, which was under the control of the eldest princess. But the imperial censorate wasted their efforts. All of the actions of the Overwatch Council were carried out according to the laws of the Qing Kingdom, and there was not a single place where they could be used against them. As for the assassination of the 3 witnesses of the Baluet brothel murder case, it was a headless murder case. Even if someone guessed that it was the Overwatch Council who did it, there was no evidence. The Overwatch Council's attitude toward the assassination was simple and clear. The 3 men had been personally sent by Commissioner Fan's family to the Yamen of the capital government. How could they have died outside the capital government? If there was a problem, the biggest problem would be Tian Jingmu, who was on good terms with his second prince. Fan Xian was very satisfied with the results of the battle so far. In any case, the bottom line of the palace was there, and he could not directly chase the second prince out of the capital. As long as he could weaken the second prince to the point where he could no longer threaten him, beat him until he was in unspeakable pain, and vent the anger of the Fan family, that was enough. Up until now, the terrifying power of the Overwatch Council had only been revealed to the public. The reason why this operation was able to go so smoothly was because Chun Pingping had used the transfer order to give all of the authority to Fan Xian. More importantly, Fan Xian's operation had been planned since he was in Shangjing, northern Qi. From summer to autumn, he and Yin Bingyan had been preparing for this for a long time. At the time, the memorials that were presented to the imperial censorate had mentioned the relationship between the second prince and the eldest princess. But last time, the emperor had not released it. This time, because of the Baluet brothel incident, Fan Xian had used his anger to bring this matter forward. If the Overwatch Council still could not win this battle, Chun Pingping would probably jump out of his wheelchair in anger and yell at these little bastards for ruining the reputation of the Overwatch Council. The palace remained eerily quiet. All the nobles, including the second prince's mother, imperial concubine Shu, the crown prince of the Eastern Palace, and the empress, seemed to be deaf and blind. They were cautious and did not express any opinions. Everyone knew that this was to see the emperor's attitude. What was the emperor doing? News had come out of the palace. The emperor had invited Jiangnan's Daoist troupe into the palace to perform in a play. At this time, there was a storm in Jingdo, but the emperor of the Qing kingdom still had spare time to accompany the empress dowager and watch a play for a day. Who knew how many baskets of copper coins he had given out? He was indescribably happy and relaxed. Now, everyone finally saw the situation clearly. It seemed that the emperor did not think this kind of small matter was worth watching. He did not even bother to lift his eyelids. How could the small fights of young people in the capital compare to the plays performed by famous troops in Jiangnan? The situation was now clear. The court officials, who had maintained a neutral stance, used their sharp minds and suddenly discovered a reality. Fan Xian's emperor's favor had reached a shocking level. Who was Fan Xian's opponent? It was the second prince, the emperor's own son. His Majesty could actually be so impartial. What kind of favor was this? These people did not dare to offend the second prince, so they could only stand even more firmly on the wall. They stuck their feet in the mud and stubbornly practiced the grassroots spirit. They swayed left and right, but they were not willing to casually lean to any side. This reality made the second prince suck in a breath of cold air. He knew that these years he had quietly developed his power in the court. He could not help but think, could it be that after Fan Xian returned to the capital, Fan Xian had secretly received instructions from the palace to target him? However, the second prince was also a sinister person. He knew that the current situation did not allow him to retreat. Even if he was willing to put aside his pride as a prince and hope to shake hands with Fan Xian a second time, Fan Xian might not be in the mood to do so. Furthermore, the emperor's warm attitude made the second prince know that if he could not defeat Fan Xian, then he could only wait for Fan Xian to knock him down to the ground, just as they had said in the tea shop. Under this strong pressure, the second prince once again reluctantly made his move. The imperial censorate once again impeached Fan Xian. This time, the charges were very real, and the evidence was very solid. In short, it had nothing to do with what Fan Xizha had done, and it also involved the Minister of Revenue, Fan Jian. The snow-like memorials were sent to the provinces, completely skipping over the Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Court. They directly asked the Fan father and son to step down and apologize. It was a battle to the death. On this day, dozens of remonstrants put on an even grander display than the last time they had impeached Fan Xian. They knelt straight in front of the palace gate. There was no rain today, and on the greenish-gray square in front of the palace, dozens of red official robes fluttering in the autumn wind were particularly eye-catching. The court elders who came and went from the palace gate could not help but shake their heads and hide behind a corner door, not daring to interfere. According to the laws of the Qing kingdom, officials who were impeached were required to explain themselves. For this impeachment, the Fan father and son had to personally go to the palace to apologize to the emperor and then explain themselves in court. But in court, the second prince's faction was still very powerful, and the debate in front of the palace was not easy for the Fan father and son to pass. The censors of the imperial censorate were full of confidence. They were waiting for Fan Jian and Fan Xian, two of the most corrupt officials in the Qing kingdom, to be taken down by them. This time was different from last time. This time, with the help of the second prince, they were able to obtain concrete evidence. It was enough to prove that the Fan family and even the Liu family's Zhongyi manor were connected to the infamous Baoyu brothel. They knelt on the ground and excitedly waited for Fan Xian's arrival. Even if the Fan family had sent Fan Xizha away and gotten rid of the Baoyu brothel, and even if the emperor had shown mercy, the evidence was still there. The Fan family would have to pay the price. They were waiting for the arrogant commissioner of the Overwatch Council to appear in front of them and admit his mistakes, apologize, and bow his head. It was not just the imperial censorate's censors. Many people were prepared to see how the Fan Manor, or the Overwatch Council, would react in the face of such an aggressive impeachment. Every official wanted to keep their face, and to be bitten by the imperial censorate like this was a very embarrassing thing to do. Everyone knew that Fan Xian was a person who placed great importance on his reputation, so the officials were even more interested. Even Shu Wu the scholar was waiting to see Fan Xian's wretched appearance with a heart full of mischief, revenge, or ridicule. But no one expected that when the emperor summoned Fan Xian, he would not come. Not only did he not come, but Minister Fan did not come either. This pair of father and son had a tacit understanding and shamelessly used the same trick: escape while sick. Hearing this news, the second prince was shocked. He did not expect the Fan family to not only be like a hungry wolf when it came to profit, but when it came to the issue of face, they were also ruthless. They did not even give the second prince a chance to win back some face. Ruthless? This father and son were ruthless. Shu Wu, the scholar, was old and used to hiding in the meeting room outside the corner door and drinking tea. After hearing this news, he spat out a mouthful of tea. He had gone to the Imperial College to play a few games of chess with Fan Xian. Fan Xian had promised to play, but now he had caused such a commotion in the capital. He even said he did not want to eat the pieces. Shu Wu the scholar was so angry at Fan Xian, who was outwardly respectful but had a belly full of evil tricks. He had hoped to see Fan Xian suffer a setback at the court conference, but he did not expect the kid to say he was sick and not come. This made the old scholar, who had been watching a show, unable to vent his anger. He was very unhappy. The news of the Fan father and son claiming illness reached the palace. The emperor, who was reading the memorials from the counties, was also shocked. He furrowed his brows and did not say anything. The concubines in the rear palace also knew of this matter. They laughed and scolded that this child of the Fan family was a troublemaker. He did not know how to make the emperor less annoyed. They also did not know how Yi Chun had married such a husband. At first, he had seemed full of poetry. Now, he was a disgruntled scoundrel. The ones who were most disappointed were the imperial censorate kneeling outside the palace gate. Since the other party claimed illness and did not come, no matter how murderous they were, there was no point of resistance. Their hearts were empty, and they felt very uncomfortable. They left dejectedly. Even the brown official robes they wore hung weakly around their bodies. They could not be bothered with the teasing of the autumn wind. People grew up eating grains and were not invincible. How could they not be sick? But for the fan father and son to fall sick so coincidentally, and for the illness to come so suddenly that they could not get out of bed, it was a bit too strange. Especially since Fan Xian was the direct disciple of Fei Jie of the Overwatch Council. Although he did not practice medicine, even the royal doctors in the palace knew of his methods. How could he suddenly fall sick? Not only did the officials in court not believe it, but the people of Jingdo did not believe it. In fact, even the ladies in the palace and the emperor on the dragon chair did not believe it. So after the court meeting ended, the palace guards led the royal doctors, led by eunuch Hong, who rarely left the palace, in a grandiose manner to Fan Manor. They sent an edict to express their condolences, and at the same time, to see what illness the father and son had. Many of the manor's spies followed this procession. Because everyone thought the fan father and son were pretending to be sick, they unconsciously thought that in order not to go to court and make a fool of themselves, they had offended the emperor. It was a small crime of deceiving the emperor. It was extremely stupid and extremely arrogant. The second prince also did not understand this matter. He was a prince and had grown up in the palace. Of course, he knew eunuch Hong's methods. No trick of pretending to be sick could be hidden from a sickly old eunuch. Fan Xian really was sick. This news was confirmed by eunuch Hong. The emperor had no follow-up measures to prove it. It spread to every corner of the capital. No one suspected that Fan Xian was pretending to be sick. Although Minister Fan had only occasionally caught a cold, Fan Xian really was bedridden. His body was very weak. At the critical moment of the Overwatch Council and the Second Prince's battle, Fan Xian had unfortunately fallen ill. This reality made many people feel a very strange emotion. Would the situation in Jingdo change because of this? After all, a similar situation had occurred in history before, when a Northern Wei Kingdom's emperor was investigating the illustrious Zhan family. The reason he was able to succeed was because the famous general Zhan Qingfeng had diarrhea for 3 days. Although history was ridiculous, it was very real. Don't worry about anything. Fan Xian frowned. He looked at Mu Tai, who was sitting in front of his bed, and said, "Just listen to Master Yan's arrangements." After returning from the capital government, he had fallen ill. Although it was not serious, after the battle with Xie Baiyan, he began to lose control of his Jinqi. It was running around in his body, forcing him to spend more time meditating. His pale complexion and strange pulse had successfully fooled the mysterious eunuch Hong. Chapter 301. In the second half of the autumn night, the moon had gone down and the sun had not yet risen. There was only a dark blue sky. There was a violent coughing in the back of Fan Manor. The coughing did not stop, and it did not stop for a long time. It startled the servants, and they struggled to wake up from their dreams. There was a flurry of activity in the garden. Perhaps it was a problem with the weather, but not only had Minister Fan caught a cold, but some of the servants had also caught a cold. Those with runny noses had been sent to the country estates outside the capital, but the rest of the people did not dare to be careless. They drank the medicine the young master had written every day. The medicine was very effective, and the cold did not spread. The reason why the coughing made the people of Fan Manor panic was because it came from the young master's room. The young master had been suffering from a strange illness for the past 2 days. He had coughed badly, but he did not want the palace doctors to prescribe medicine. He believed in his own methods. But after a few days, the coughing had not subsided. The servants of Fan Manor could not help but worry, afraid that something had happened to the young master, who had been very kind to them. The head maid, Cici, had a red ribbon tied around her forehead and combed her slightly messy hair. She stood angrily in the small kitchen. As she smelled the strong smell of medicine coming from the room, she called out to the girls who did the hard work, telling them to work faster. She was someone sent to the capital by the ancestors of Danzhou, and her future status was obvious. So in Fan manner, her words carried some weight. The sleepy servants knew that the young master's illness was troublesome. Seeing her angry, they bit their lips and did not dare to respond. After watching for a while, Cece still could not relax. She moved a small stool and sat in front of the medicine stove. She held a fan in her hand and gently waved it. She stared unblinkingly at the mouth of the stove, where the medicinal mist was rising. Her eyes gradually turned red, and she did not dare to be careless. Brewing medicine was very particular about the heat. The medicine in front of her was for the young master to take. If she did not watch, she would not feel at ease. In the bedroom, Lin Wanner was wearing a cotton robe embroidered on the outside. She rubbed Fan Xian's chest, feeling sorry for him. Carefully, she asked, "How about we really try the royal doctor's prescription?" Fan Xian coughed until his face was red. He waved his hand and forced a smile. "How could I be so precious? Besides, I know my own body. I won't die. Just prescribe some medicine for myself." Lin Wan also knew that her husband's medical skills were exceptional. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to cure the lung disease that had haunted her for 15 years. But these past few days she had heard him coughing violently, so she couldn't help but feel worried. Biting her lip, she said, "Even Eunuch Hong can't tell the cause of this illness, but you say you know you—" She rolled her eyes and said, "Should I write a letter to Mr. Fei and ask?" Fan Xian coughed again. He knew that his wife was still worried. He sighed and said, "It's not like you don't know that teacher of mine. Out of every year, he spends most of the year wandering around. Even if he wanted to rush back, who knows how long it would take." He then smiled and said, "Maybe 3 or 4 months. By that time, I'm afraid I'll already be a dead man. You—" He gently flicked the tip of Wanner's nose and jokingly said, "Then you'll be the prettiest widow in the capital." Lin Wanner spat on the ground a few times and angrily said, "What time is it? And you still say such nonsense." Fan Xian laughed. He wasn't as nervous as the rest of the family because he knew exactly what had happened to his body. The medicine he was brewing right now was only to help him calm his heart and clear his mind, relax his lungs, clear his meridians, and stabilize his condition. As for the real cause of the illness, he would have to rely on himself to fix it. As he spoke, he comforted Wanner a bit and then carefully placed his right hand under the blanket. His right hand would occasionally tremble. It had started outside the capital government, and it hadn't gotten any better until today. There was a knock on the door, and Cece carefully carried the medicine into the room. The servant girl, Siki, who slept with her in the front room, had long since climbed out of bed. She lit the oil lamp on the table, moved a high table, and placed it in front of the bed of the young master and mistress. She took the bowl of medicine, took out a spoon, and gently stirred the medicine in the bowl to cool it down. When the temperature was just right, she fed Fan Xian a small sip. Fan Xian drank it, and it tasted a little bitter. He unconsciously licked his lips, but Cece had already stuffed a sugar pill into his mouth and immediately diluted the bitterness in his mouth. He couldn't help but laugh. "I'm a man. Do you really need to serve me like this?" Cece smiled and said, "Young master, when you were little, you were afraid of taking medicine." Fan Xian thought to himself, the medicine in this world can't be coated with sugar, so of course he would frown when he drank it. Siki took out a silk handkerchief from her sleeve and helped Fan Xian wipe the corner of his mouth. She also said very seriously, "Young master, you are now a patient. You can't force yourself." Seeing the 2 servant girls like this, even Wanner couldn't stand it anymore. She laughed and scolded them, "Don't spoil him too much." Although she said this, her small hands kept moving down Fan Xian's back, making him feel more comfortable. Although Fan Xian enjoyed the life of a young master and felt that it was a good thing to be so comfortable when sick, he couldn't help but shake his head. He reached for the bowl of medicine and drank it in one gulp. He wiped his mouth with his sleeve and smiled. "I'm a part-time doctor, not child." The 2 servant girls looked at each other and smiled. They didn't say anything. Seeing that it was getting late, Fan Xian knew that his coughing had kept the servant girls busy for a while. He couldn't help but feel a little guilty. He said, After you drink the medicine, you shouldn't be coughing anymore. Go to sleep. Let the servant girls who are on night watch go to sleep as well. The autumn night is cold. What if they get sick again? It's going to be dawn soon. Why are you still sleeping? It's always better to sleep a little longer, Fan Xian said seriously. They knew that this young master cared for his servants, and that under his gentle appearance was a heart that never went back on his word. Cece and Siki didn't dare to argue. They agreed in unison and went out to arrange the chores. Fan Xian got out of bed and poured a cup of tea to rinse his mouth. Warner saw this and couldn't help but say, "Drinking cold tea when you're sick isn't good for your body." Fan Xian smiled and sat back on the bed. "I told you, this illness is different from other illnesses." The couple talked for a while. Warner saw that he wasn't coughing anymore, and she felt a little more at ease. She felt sleepy, but seeing that he didn't want to sleep, she didn't either. Finally, Fan Xian couldn't stand it anymore. He quietly reached out and rubbed her shoulders. His fingers brushed over a few of the calming acupuncture points on her head. Only then did she fall asleep. Looking at his sleeping wife, Fan Xian knew that she had been worried about him these past few days. She was mentally and physically exhausted. He couldn't help but shake his head. His illness wasn't something that could be cured just by taking good care of himself. It wasn't like his father's. Minister Fan's cold, under his skillful hands, was already showing signs of improvement. In about 2 more days, he would be completely cured. However, his father was old, and his body wasn't like a young man's. His recovery was always slower. He gently waved his hand and extinguished the oil lamp on the table 5 feet away. The entire bedroom sank into darkness, but he kept his bright eyes open. He still couldn't fall asleep because he had been sitting quietly for too long these past few days. It was not easy for him to get sleepy. The tip of his tongue gently licked the dregs of the medicine between his teeth, evaluating the herbs he had personally chosen. He seemed to be able to feel the active ingredients in the herbs enter his lungs and begin to help him soothe the discomfort. He felt a little proud of himself. He reached out and pulled the blanket over his wife's body. Then he put his hand into a secret compartment under his pillow and pulled out a small medicine pouch. Inside the pouch were several large pills that were perfectly round and rough to the touch. Although the room was dark, Fan Xian knew that these pills were red. Ever since he was young, Mr. Fei Jie had ordered him to carry these pills with him at all times, just in case something went wrong with the nameless martial secrets he was practicing. If that overbearing and ruthless Xinqi was about to break through his meridians, this pill would be his last resort. When Fan Xian was very young, when he was still living in Danzhou, Fei Jie had discovered this fatal problem. The nameless martial secrets that Wu Zhu had left for Fan Xian, or rather, for Fan Xian's mother, could indeed be cultivated into an overbearing and vigorous Xinqi. The problem was that this kind of Xinqi was too overbearing and ruthless. If an ordinary person were to practice it, they would not be able to practice for long before the Xinqi in their body would burst and pierce through them. Once their meridians were broken, they would naturally become useless. But compared to the people of this world, there was something strange about Fan Xian. His meridians seemed to be much thicker than those of the people of this world. Because of this, he had been secretly practicing the nameless and tyrannical martial method since he was a baby. By the time he was 4 years old, the Xinqi in his body had already reached a shocking level, but he had not exploded and died. But Fei Jie had once said that as the Xinqi in his body grew stronger and stronger, there would come a day when the naturally formed meridian channels would no longer be able to contain it, and Fan Xian would have to suffer greatly. But after more than 10 years, Fan Xian did not feel this kind of danger. Although the Xinqi in his body was overbearing, it was still under his control. Especially after the age of 12, when he finished practicing the first volume of the nameless martial secrets, the storm-like Xinqi in his body suddenly stopped. It was completely tamed and did not affect him in the slightest. So he gradually let down his guard and even almost forgot about the matter. He no longer carried the pills with him at all times, but left them at home. Except when he went on a diplomatic mission to northern Qi, he had brought one with him, but he had not used it. Trouble always came when people were least prepared. After the seemingly safe but dangerous journey to northern Qi, the Jinqi in Fan Xian's body had finally merged with his skills. He had already broken through the threshold of the 9th level and was beginning to reach the pinnacle of martial arts in the world. The overbearing Jinqi in his body had finally reached perfection, and he could even fight against Ku He's disciple, Lang Tiao. Unexpectedly, after he defeated Xieba and one of the 8 generals outside the capital government, the Jinqi in his body began to act up. Starting from the snow mountain at the back of his waist, along the meridians, the 2 Jinqi channels were like 2 circles communicating with each other in his body. But now, the Jinqi seemed to have smelled some traces of the owner of his body, and it began to become restless. It was no longer willing to stay in the meridians, and instead, it kept extending, probing, and piercing in all directions. Fan Xian's hands were where he had perfect control of the Jinqi, but now they had become the juncture for the Jinqi in his body to overflow. Now his right hand would occasionally tremble. That was the result of the Jinqi in his muscles and meridians not listening to him. The situation was not too serious. At least, it was still within his control. After these days of meditation, he had used his mind to suppress the overbearing Jinqi in his body. But the 2 opposing forces had damaged his lungs, and that was why he could not stop coughing. But if he allowed this situation to continue, there would come a day when he would not be able to control the overbearing and violent Jinqi in his body. Fan Xian had also tried to practice the second half of the nameless martial secret, but so far he had not made any progress. Sometimes when he coughed badly, he hated Wu Zhu. You gave me the absorbing stars, so you should at least give me a way to deal with it, right? He gently squeezed the medicine pouch in his hand and frowned. A few days ago, he had analyzed the pill his teacher had left him. It was like a tiger fighting a lion. To help him deal with the overbearing Jinqi in his body, his teacher had also given him a very overbearing medicine. He had no confidence in what would happen if he took the medicine. There was a lot of mayflower mixed in it, and that was an authentic medicine for dispersing Jinqi. Was he willing to give up the Jinqi that he had painstakingly cultivated for over 10 years? Even if he did not lose his Jinqi, he feared that the Jinqi in his body would be consumed by more than half. But if he did not take it, did he have to watch the Jinqi explode into a giant ball of blood in a few months, or perhaps a few years? Even if it did not have such a terrifying effect, it did not look good to have his right hand constantly trembling. He was so young, and yet he had to act like someone with Parkinson's disease? To take it or not to take it, that was a big question. A rooster crowed in the distance, waking up the sun and driving away the night, but the people were still sleeping soundly. Fan Xian raised his head and realized that he had been sitting by the bed for an hour. He couldn't help but laugh at himself. He, who was most afraid of death, when faced with such a difficult situation, could also be so cowardly and hesitant. Perhaps this was also an opportunity, he comforted himself. Do not destroy the shape of the Hua pool. Let the heavenly spring pour into my body. He slowly recited the incantation and sat by the bed, entering a meditative state. He carefully withdrew the chaotic Jinqi in his body into his meridians, and then slowly returned it to the snow-capped mountain behind his waist, letting it shine brightly there, illuminating the snow-capped mountain. Suddenly, his heart jumped, and Fan Xian opened his eyes. He casually put on some clothes, pushed open the door, and walked to the most secluded corner of the garden. It was the little practice field where he had tested the poison needles. He didn't need to look around to see the strange uncle with a black cloth covering his face next to the fake mountain. He couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. He opened his mouth to complain, "So you still know to come back." Chapter 302. The sky was already bright, and the morning breeze was blowing in the courtyard, but it was still very dark. The person next to the rockery was dressed in coarse clothes, with an iron stake casually stuck in his waist. His face was covered with a piece of black cloth, but he seemed to be one with the surrounding scenery and buildings. He didn't make a sound, and even his presence seemed very faint. Even if a servant walked past him, they wouldn't be able to find him. Fan Xian looked at the man in front of him, who had lived with day and night for 16 years. Thinking about how long it had been since they had last seen each other, he did not know what to feel. He wanted to beat him up, but he was sure that he would not be able to beat him. Should he throw himself at him and cry? Uncle Wu Zhu was not a person who liked to stir up emotions, so he could only shake his head and suppress the joy in his heart. He walked over and found that Uncle Wu Zhu was holding a small knife in his hand. He was incessantly carving something. When he got closer, he realized that he was carving a piece of wood. Fortunately, it is not a carving of a woman. Otherwise, I would have thought that you had become the blind Tanhua, that innocent Li Xuanhuan. The courtyard was silent. Fan Xian suppressed his laughter. Then I would vomit. Wu Zhu, surprisingly, nodded and said, Li Xuanhuan is indeed a very shameless person. It was Fan Xian's turn to be surprised. After a moment, he said, You know Li Xuanhuan? Wu Zhu put the piece of wood and the knife back into his sleeve. He said coldly, The lady told me this story, and she hated this male lead the most. Fan Xian laughed. It seems that I am quite similar to my mother. A moment later, the two of them appeared in the most secretive of the 3 study rooms in Fan Manor. Although there were no traps around, without Fan Xian's permission, no one could approach this study. Even Minister Fan had tacitly agreed to this rule. Tell me, what have you been doing for the past 6 months? Without question, Fan Xian was very interested in Wu Zhu's disappearance. Although he had already confirmed his suspicions from the small piece of wood, such shocking gossip had to be heard from the mouth of the person in question. Only then would it be particularly exciting. At this moment, he seemed to have long forgotten the Jinshi running around in his body like a little mouse. He also forgot that he should first ask Uncle Wu how he could save his own life. Instead, he stared straight into Wu Zhu's eyes. He also poured himself a cup of last night's leftover tea. Naturally, Wu Zhu did not get any, because Wu Zhu did not drink tea. I went to the north. Wu Zhu thought for a moment, as if confirming his itinerary. Then I went to the south. Fan Xian was used to his uncle's strange way of thinking, so he was not angry at the senseless answer. Instead, he patiently asked, What are you going to do in the north? Why are you going south? I'm going to the north to find Ku. Wu Zhu said calmly. He did not think that many people would be scared to death if this matter were spread. After a fight, I went to the south to find someone. Fan Xian chuckled. The Grandmaster Ku, he had been injured. Naturally, it was the blind uncle in front of him who had played a good trick. Immediately, he thought of a problem and furrowed his brows in concern. Are you all right? Wu Zhu tilted his head slightly and looked at his left shoulder. I was injured here, but it's already healed. His words were simple and to the point, but Fan Xian could feel the danger. He had fought with Haidang and could clearly feel the power of Haitong's bald teacher, one of the top 4 grandmasters in the world. It must have been terrifying. Although Wu Zhu was arrogant, it was inevitable that Fan Xian would have to pay a price for injuring him. As long as he was healed now, that was all that mattered. Why did you do it? Fan Xian frowned. Wu Zhu said, First of all, if he was in northern Qi, I thought it would be inconvenient for you. Fan Xian nodded. If Ku he had been in Shangjing when he went on the diplomatic mission, he would not have been able to toy with the armed forces of northern Qi and obtain so much useful information before Shaoan died. Wu Zhu continued, Second of all, I felt that I knew Ku he, so I wanted to ask him about what happened all those years ago. Fan Xian suddenly raised his head and looked at him in surprise. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind. He thought of Shaoan's memories of the Temple of Eternal Night before his death. He frowned and said quietly, Perhaps. Uncle really did know Ku he, at least back then. Next, he told Wu Zhu all the stories he had heard in the cave, hoping that he could recall something important. For example, Wu Zhu's relationship with the temple. When he was little, he had heard Wu Zhu say that he and his mother had escaped from home together. Could that home have been the temple? Wu Zhu was silent for a long time. He did not appear in the novel where he clutched his head in meditation and pulled at his hair in pain, but could not remember anything. He simply said, I can't remember. So it was Fan Xian's turn to pull at his hair. He muttered in a low voice, "What is this?" He shook his head, dispelling the disappointment in his heart. "Why didn't you return to the capital after you were injured? You were already injured. What was the point of going south to find someone?" Is Yi Luyun in the south?" Wu Zhu shook his head coldly. "There are some problems in the south. After confirming that He knew me, I went south to find the problematic person. Unfortunately, I did not find him." Fan Xian felt a headache coming on. For the past 6 months, he had been in the north and south, and it seemed that his uncle had not rested much. He had played a pantomime with the imperial advisor of northern Qi, and then he had gone south to find his family. But if He knew Wu Zhu, yes, Shaon had said that He's current fortune could not be separated from the trip to the temple all those years ago. At the time, he knew his mother, but at the time, his mother and Wu Zhu were not together. There was a problematic person in the south. Then who was it? Fan Xian's mind spun quickly. He immediately thought of the case he had received in Shanjing. A cold-blooded serial killer had appeared in the south of the kingdom of Qing. Yan Bingyan took this matter very seriously and was prepared to mobilize the emperor's personal tiger guards to go find him. But since even Uncle Wu Zhu had not found the person, Fan Xian feared that Yan Bingyan would only be disappointed in the future. He took a deep breath and put aside these matters that could not affect him for the time being. He reported to his uncle what he had done in the past 6 months. He even told him about the secret agreement between him and Haidang that no one else knew about. Unexpectedly, Wu Zhu did not respond. Fan Xian had known since he was a child that Wu Zhu would never praise him, but he had done so many things. He had even killed Xiaoan and beaten the second prince so miserably. Surely Wu Zhu would respond, as if he were listening to a story? As if sensing that Fan Xian was a little unhappy, Wu Zhu thought for a moment and said something to explain. "It's just a small matter." Well, the struggle between him and the second prince, in the eyes of people like Wu Zhu and the emperor, was not much different from a child's quarrel. As for the secret agreement, perhaps the emperor would be interested, but Uncle Wu Zhu would not care. Fan Xian understood this and could not help but laugh at himself. He stretched out his right hand and said, "My hand has been shaking a lot lately. You have to take a look at it." Knowing that the Jinqi in Fan Xian's body was showing signs of going berserk, Wu Zhu was still inhumanly calm. "I've never practiced it before. I don't know what to do." Fan Xian finally lost his mind when it came to matters of life and death. He lowered his voice and roared, "There's not even the slightest safety factor. I was just born, and you made me practice it. What if I died?" "The lady said it was the best," Wu Zhu replied coldly. "And someone has practiced it before." "Of course someone has." Fan Xian bluntly pointed out the loophole in his uncle's words. Wu Zhu did not hide anything. "There's not much of a problem. At most, your Jinqi will completely dissipate, and you will become an ordinary person, unless you're stupid enough to give up your so-called Jinqi at the last moment." Fan Xian was angry. "You're a monster. Of course you don't know how important Jinqi is to ordinary warriors. If I lose the tyrannical Jinqi in my body, I won't be able to defeat Haidang Duo. There are so many enemies in the world who could destroy me at any time. So what do I do now?" He raised his slightly trembling right hand and said angrily, "Am I supposed to let it keep shaking like Wu Meng Da? Right now it's just my hand shaking. When the Jinqi in my body thickens, I'm afraid even my butt will shake." Wu Zhu raised his head. The black cloth over his eyes seemed to be coldly laughing at Fan Xian. "If you don't practice it, your Jinqi will naturally not increase." His words woke Fan Xian from his reverie. Fan Xian had long since become accustomed to meditating and practicing martial arts twice a day. He had never thought about stopping. Now he realized that before he found a solution, the first thing he should do was stop practicing the tyrannical Jinqi of the nameless martial formula. Although the Jinqi in his body would naturally develop and grow during battle, it would be slower than feeding it every day. He nodded and sighed. "That's all I can do. Let the big bang come a little later." Wu Zhu suddenly said, "Fei Jie left some medicine for you." Fan Xian was surprised. He hadn't expected Wu Zhu to remember something from his childhood. He nodded and explained, That medicine was a bit tyrannical. I was worried that if I took it, my internal energy would dissipate. Wu Zhu lowered his head, as if remembering something. He suddenly said, "It should work, although it can only cure the symptoms." At this moment, Fan Xian did not dare to completely believe his uncle's words. After all, this deadly nameless martial secret had been carelessly thrown to the side of his pillow. He smiled bitterly and said, "We'll talk about these things in the future. First, let's talk about you. Uncle, in the future, before you go missing, can you tell me first? Is that necessary?" Wu Zhu asked seriously. "Yes." Fan Xian nodded. "On the way to Northern Qi, I always thought you were with me. And so was the chest, so I was brave enough to bully Haitang Duo. I didn't think you would be there. Doing something like that could kill someone." Wu Zhu hesitated for a moment. "Oh, I know." Fan Xian let out a sigh of relief. Ever since he was a child, he was used to Wu Zhu staying close to him. For example, in the carriage, in the grocery store, on the cliff by the sea. After entering the capital, Wu Zhu spent less time by his side. Although he was strong enough to protect himself, he knew that as he progressed in this world, he would face more and more challenges. Having an uncle like Wu Zhu by his side made him feel that the world was a piece of open land, and he felt much safer. "I plan to move out." Fan Xian coughed lightly. "Living in the backyard is a bit inconvenient. There are too many people, and you can't live with us." Wu Zhu tilted his head. He was confused as to why Fan Xian wanted to move just for him. "I hasn't met you, uncle," Fan Xian said seriously. "You're the closest person to me. You haven't met my wife." Wu Zhu slowly said, "I have. She hasn't met you." Fan Xian smiled bitterly. "And you're always floating outside the manor by yourself. I don't even know where you live or what you do. This kind of feeling makes me, a bit uncomfortable." Wu Zhu tilted his head again. He seemed to understand what Fan Xian was trying to say. The corners of his lips twitched, but he still didn't smile. He slowly said, "You deal with it. But I don't want anyone other than your wife to know that I'm by your side." Fan Xian nodded happily. Then he thought of something and said awkwardly, "Not even Ruruo? I've always wanted to let her see you." "No," Wu Zhu coldly said. "That's it. Go do what you need to do. Pretend I never came back." Fan Xian sighed. Hearing the faint sounds of people getting up, he walked out of the study, rubbing his wrists. In the study, Wu Zhu's face, which seemed to be eternally expressionless, finally broke into a smile that only appeared once every 500 years. And this time, the smile seemed to be joking, as if he was making fun of Fan Xian for not knowing something. In the autumn garden, the grass was covered with white frost, and the sun was warm and soft in the sky. Fan Xian was wrapped in a thin quilt, lying on a soft couch in the garden. He was resting, occasionally coughing, but he was much better than he had been the night before. There was a swing in the corner of the garden, and a few brave maids were swinging it. Their light-colored dresses bloomed like flowers on a small board tied to a long rope. Next to the swing, Cece and Siki, the two maids, watched with great interest. Their faces occasionally showed envy, but they were too proud of their status to step onto the swing and show off their skills. Fan Xian squinted as he watched the girl on the swing. Her dress spread out like a flower, like a parachute from his previous life. The waxy trousers under her dress flickered in and out of view. He couldn't help but think of a movie called Peacock. A hand reached out from the side and fed him a thin black date. The date was very light, and it was carefully cut, very much to his taste. He chewed it 2 or 3 times and said in a muffled voice, "Why aren't you taking care of your father? Why are you here?" Wanner and Ruo sat on either side of him, taking care of this unconscious patient. Ruo smiled and said, "I get bored staying in my room all the time. Brother is sick, and yet he's in the mood to come to the garden and watch the maids play on the swing." Wanna laughed and said, "He's not here to watch the swing. He's here to watch the people on the swing." Fan Xian didn't bother to explain. He laughed and said, "Watching the scenery, you have to bring the people with you." He then shouted, "Cece, don't be a little wife. If you want to swing, go ahead and swing." These words could easily be misunderstood. After he said them, he was stunned. Fortunately, the girls next to him didn't understand. He was the only one smiling awkwardly. He coughed to hide it and suddenly thought of something. He asked one who was next to him, "The autumn is getting colder. Look, the chrysanthemums in the garden are all a bit frozen. Last time, the palace said they were going to hold a chrysanthemum viewing party in the suburbs of the capital. Why haven't there been any news yet? When the first snow falls, even if we want to see them, we won't be able to. Are the people in the palace not afraid of disappointing them?" One rolled her eyes and smiled. "It's a bit later than last year, but the news is that they're going to the floating temple to see the golden chrysanthemums. Those chrysanthemums are very cold resistant, so they shouldn't be afraid." Fan Xian couldn't help but shake his head. He knew that the delay of the chrysanthemum viewing party had something to do with the recent excitement in the capital. Over the past 2 days, the situation in the capital had been settled. Although many people thought that at this time, he had to pretend to be sick in order to keep the second prince in check. But he knew in his heart that the Overwatch Council didn't need him to worry too much. All the plans had been made, and with Yin watching, he had a good grasp of the situation. There shouldn't be any problems. His body was a bit better, but he still pretended to be sick and refused to go to court. He also refused to go to the first bureau or stay in the council. He just hid in the garden of his home and pretended to be a patient in the capital. It was like watching a play, watching the second prince worry. Higher, a bit higher. Fan Xian hid on the soft couch, with his wife and sisters serving him. He watched as Cece, full of courage, swung higher and higher on the swing. It was as if she was going to swing out of the garden and fly over the high walls to see the scenery of the capital. He couldn't help but laugh and shout. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.